Sometime in the early 1990s, a battered VHS tape began circulating within the University of Virginia's underground film scene. A tape which appeared to document something impossible, something quietly terrifying, that defied the very laws of Euclidean geometry.
It was labeled the 5.5-minute hallway, and though the veracity of the video was always in question, nobody could deny it was at the very least a compelling hoax.
However, due to its relative obscurity and existence before the ubiquity of internet archivism, the tape eventually fell into the annals of lost media urban legend, with the few who even knew of it unsure if it really existed in the first place.
Until very recently, it resurfaced, along with the entire story which surrounded the tape and those who made it, and most importantly, the rest of the film this 5.5 minutes comes from. And here's the catch, it claims that all of it is true. Now, original copies of the 5.5-minute hallway tape are exceedingly hard to come by, locked away in a few private collections. But with a little digging, I was able to find a fairly intact copy of the tape, at least the real meat of it, though it doesn't include the full runtime. Excuse the resolution, most of these clips that you can find are re-uploads from the early internet of 144p. It's not the best quality.
As you can see, the film appears to show, in one continuous shot, a door which leads into a dark hallway. A hallway that you not only cannot see from the outside, but can literally pass through. A home that is bigger on the inside than out.
How is this possible? Who created this? And more importantly, if this is only one small piece of a larger whole, is there more like this? As it turns out, yes.
This clip comes from a now lost documentary film known as The Navidson Record, a film which documented an entire home of impossible geometry. And this was just the beginning. Crossing that dark threshold opens the film up into even stranger and more unsettling things.
But the actual details of this film are hard to come by. All that's left are scattered clips and screenshots. So today, using the pieces we do have access to, I'm going to piece together the events of the Navidson Record and what happened to the people inside it, with a little help.
There is a very detailed written account of the events of the film. An obscure, more than 700-page academic analysis of the Navidson Record titled House of Leaves.
It is enormously helpful in filling in the blanks between the degenerated VHS copies and 144p re-uploads, but more than that, this book too unravels into a mystery all its own.
The authors offer conflicting accounts of reality. They spiral into obsession over the film.
But make no mistake, the story of the house is incomplete without this book, and I will be spending just as much time unraveling the book's mysteries as the film itself. This is most definitely the most ambitious project I've embarked upon, but I have to warn you.
For some, diving this deeply into the walls of that place can lead to adverse effects on the psyche. Those winding corridors of ash can lead you to some even darker places. This will be my final warning.
Look now, here she comes. some annihilation. Look now, here she comes, some annihilation. A sight to see undone, some annihilation. A sight to see undone, some annihilation.
Let's get into this, shall we? We'll jump into the Navidson Record proper in a moment, but our story really begins before these clips resurfaced.
At the start of the new millennium, House of Leaves was released to the world.
And have we got a book for you? This thing is 700 pages long. It's got 8 typefaces. It's got text running off the sides. It's got poems. It's got appendices. It's got an index. It's the craziest thing we've ever seen.
Initially released in its early stages on the internet and eventually published as a full 700-page book, it is weird and fascinating and almost immediately became a cult classic. A manuscript, essentially an academic essay, but it wasn't published by some university or academic institution. It was found by a man who used the pen name Johnny Truant, who then spent years organizing and formatting the manuscript for publishing, leaving pages and pages of his own footnotes, commentary, and stories before sending the whole thing to another set of editors for publishing.
Let's remember, at the time of this book's release, all memory of the Navidson Record was basically forgotten, Johnny Truant himself claiming it didn't even exist, that it was a fiction made up by the original author, who simply went by Zampanò. But with the reemergence of the film, or at least pieces of it, it brings everything into question. Are the clips we've found hoaxes based on the book? Or did Zampanò really see a complete copy of the film before it disappeared? Is the Navidson Record a Blair Witch-style fiction, or proof of the supernatural? For those interested in analyzing this stuff, it's kind of like Schrodinger's found footage film. Like, in one universe the film doesn't exist, and in another it does, and we're living in a kind of superposition. And that's where we'll have to stay to get the full picture. Analyze this as a fiction with narrative intent, as a true story, and as something just made up by Zampanò all at once. With that said, and with the help of Zampanò's detailed accounts, let me tell you the story of the Navidson Record. From the clips and accounts written in House of Leaves, we know that the Navidson Record begins rather quaintly. A family moving into a new home in the Virginia countryside. This isn't just any family, though.
We're following the lives of William Navidson and Karen Green, long-term partners who at this point in 1990 have 2 kids, Chad and Daisy.
Will Navidson is a fairly prolific photographer known for his focus on the war-torn and dramatic, and Karen Green is a successful but retired Ford agency model. The story goes, and as some of the video journal entries in the film explain early on, Navidson's long and often unexpected work trips to the far reaches of the globe began creating a rift within their relationship, and so the film was a way for him to continue working and stay at home. The concept was a grounded but fairly ambitious documentary showcasing the family's attempt to settle into domesticity in a new home. And in the beginning, that's mostly what we see.
Through the lenses of personal video entries, moments captured by Navidson himself, and the many security-style cameras he set up around the house. It doesn't shy away from the tensions of family life, though.
For Navidson's part, his obsession with work and aforementioned long times away in life-threatening situations created an untenable situation for Karen and their children, while Karen's past affairs still loom over the relationship. But this move was also a way for them to put all of that behind them, and so the opening of the film is mostly filled with the peace and charm of a happy family.
Kids playing in the backyard, comfortable evenings on the front porch, Navidson and Karen bantering. Despite their issues, their affection for each other is clear. Even still, there is a mild sense of darkness that creeps in from time to time. We learn the house they've moved into, which we'll refer to from here on as either the house on Ash Tree Lane or simply the house, has been through many previous owners, all of whom seem to stay for a year or two and leave feeling traumatized in some way. And on a personal note, Karen confides to the camera that Will has been saying the name Delisle in his sleep. There's still that tension.
But the catalyst to the horror that will soon consume their family truly begins that June, when the family returns from a trip in Seattle.
Upon their return, they find something incredibly strange has changed within their home. There is a door which wasn't there before. Where there was previously just a wall between the two upstairs bedrooms, there is now a small, closet-sized doorway connecting the two. We watch with the family as they check the tapes of the security cameras, only to find the confounding reality that the last time it was activated was when the family left the house, no door in sight. And the very next shot, from the day of their return, the door is there, like it appeared in the blink of an eye. Though they contact everyone they can think of, the police, the realtor, there isn't really a next steps to a new door appearing in your bedroom. And so, though unsettled, the family is forced to continue with their life. What's very important to remember about all the information we have when it comes to the details of the Navidson Record is that it's being filtered through this 700-page behemoth. So we need to pay just as much attention to the book as the events of the film itself. It's what was important from Zampanò and Johnny's perspective. So what is it that they have to say near the start? Well, in the foreword written by Johnny Truant, he first tells us how he came across this manuscript in the first place. It begins with a friend of his, who he calls Lude. The two of them have led a pretty indulgent LA lifestyle, the clubs and bars of Hollywood nightlife, and lots of casual substances and hookups. So when Lude calls him up one late night in 1996 to check something out, he has little reason to think his meeting at Lude's apartment would be particularly life-changing. But what Lude shows Johnny is quite different than his usual antics. One of Lude's neighbors, an old man who went by the name Zampanò, just recently passed away. With no friends or family to speak of, Lude was able to poke around a little bit and discovered three very peculiar things. Firstly, the stray cats which Zampanò was often seen feeding in the courtyard just disappeared. Next, despite supposedly dying of natural causes, a massive claw mark was found in Zampanò's floor with no discernible cause. And finally, aside from the meager knickknacks Zampanò had in his apartment, he left behind this massive manuscript, the very one we're reading. Lude thinks it's the kind of thing Johnny might be into, and so Johnny indeed takes it home with him, though is initially only mildly interested, only really taking note of two peculiar things. Firstly, the irony that the writing seems so focused on the visual language of the film, despite Zampanò having been blind for the past 40-something years. But most strangely, Johnny says he can't seem to find any evidence that the Navidson Record exists, coming to the conclusion that it was entirely fabricated by Zampanò. As Johnny's time with the writing increased, so did his obsession with it. He writes that he began to lose track of time reading, becoming more shut in and paranoid. This foreword was actually written near the end of his time with the book chronologically, in October of 1998, 2 years after discovering it. And the picture he paints as to how this at first innocuous project has affected his life is not pretty. Barely able to eat, hardly sleeping, and when he does, plagued with terrible nightmares. It all seems a little intense for some scattered pages of amateur academia, but Johnny Truant ends the foreword to this book with a warning that the very same fate may befall you if you go on ahead reading. You'll suddenly realize that things are not how you perceived them to be at all. For some reason, you will no longer be the person you believed you once were. You'll watch yourself dismantle every assurance you ever lived by, tearing apart piece by piece all of your carefully conceived denials. And then, for better or worse, you'll turn to face the thing you most dread, the creature you truly are, the creature we all are, buried in the nameless black of name. And then the nightmares will begin. And then, after that stark warning, we dive straight into the writing itself, Zampanò's dissection of the film, which begins with the apt quote from Dante's Inferno, "Abandon all hope, ye who enter here," which ties in quite nicely with Johnny's warning for us. It's like the very act of being audience to both the film and the book itself is a
dangerous journey in and of itself. Seeing as Zampanò actually covers the film in fairly chronological order, I think it would make the most sense to discuss the film as it plays out, and whenever Zampanò or Johnny have something particularly interesting to add, we shift attention back to the book. And seeing as Johnny's footnotes are written basically as he's reading, start to finish, we can really think of these as two parallel timelines playing out next to each other. As the events of the Navidson Green family play out, so do Johnny's writings, parallel timelines in fairly linear fashion.
On that note, this early part of the film is at least somewhat still focused on peaceful domesticity. Tensions have risen a bit since this strange new door appeared, but the couple still go about their regular days, cleaning the house, taking the kids to school, fixing a broken water heater, and it's here that Johnny actually makes a pretty telling reveal.
Remember, all these details we only know because it's been filtered through the writing of Zampanò and Johnny. And Johnny reveals he's actually changed something from the original manuscript.
Something innocuous. What was originally the word heater, he's exchanged for water heater, and specifically uses this change to bring up his own issues with a water heater. I got up this morning to take a shower, and guess what? No fucking hot water. Essentially, Johnny is fabricating details in the original writing, or at least changing them a bit. Zampanò only wrote the word heater. The word water back there? I added that. Now there's an admission, eh? Hey, that's not fair, you cry. Hey, fuck you, I say. Wow, I am mad right now.
Johnny has just made it clear that we cannot trust him or Zampanò's writing to be entirely reliable. How accurate is Zampanò's writing for one, but also what has Johnny explicitly changed? Though a subtle revision, we'll continue to see this throughout Johnny's writing. He uses things that happen in the film as a jumping off point to talk about his own life constantly.
At one point early on in the book, he uses a footnote to go on this convoluted story about how he and Lude went to a bar and started telling tall tales about him being a pit boxer and Russian sea captains and exotic birds of paradise. This is sort of a shtick he has with Lude, telling women at bars these fabricated stories supposedly behind the scars he has on his face, or more commonly, the large network of scars on his arms. The real story behind these he doesn't divulge to us at this point.
This is all another admission, really, that he has no qualms about lying or making things up. All of this is to say, the unreliability of what we're seeing and reading as the audience is a major through line. Nothing is to be taken for granted. With this understanding that Johnny's personal thoughts may be just as influential in our analysis as the actual events of the film, I want to make a final note here about some other thoughts Johnny provides in these early footnotes, reflecting on why he was the one who happened to stumble upon the manuscript, why he felt compelled to continue working on it, and he seems to believe it's because the manuscript was in some way like him, left behind and lonely.
What can I say? I'm a sucker for abandoned stuff. As a counselor for disaffected youth once told me, you like that crap because it reminds you of you. Though he doesn't go into the details, he does reveal to us readers some pieces of his troubled childhood. His father dying when he was only 10, and his mother dying only 10 years after that. His life from childhood up to now has been rough.
And perhaps this personal history is what has drawn him to this book. And it's not hard to see why, especially when we consider the fact that Navidson and Karen Green had similarly troubled childhoods in their own ways, which we'll return to at a later time. It's just worth noting the parallels between Johnny Truant and the subjects of the film. Returning to the film, the next step in the Navidson Green family's descent is so small it almost seems insignificant, about 1/4 an inch. Still perturbed by the strange new space in their home, Will Navidson begins making measurements of the house and finds something very odd. The house seems to be imperceptibly bigger on the inside than out, by roughly 1/4 an inch. Though easily attributable to human error or some faulty measurement,
we watch as Will Navidson becomes more and more obsessed with accounting for this strange physical impossibility, much to Karen's chagrin. She has been quietly but deeply disturbed by this new strange space, an intrusion she would much rather avoid thinking about.
Navidson's pet project of home measurement eventually leads him to contact his estranged fraternal twin brother, Tom Navidson.
Earlier in their lives, Tom and Will were inseparable, bonds formed from their shared childhood difficulties, an absent mother and abusive father. But in their adulthoods, they grew apart, though neither addressed the real reasons for this explicitly in the film.
Zampanò speculates that it was their differing paths in adulthood. Will's shifting from taking care of his brother to focus on his career and family, and Tom's difficulties with alcoholism and relative aimlessness. Their somewhat awkward reunion concerns Tom's career as a carpenter, Will hoping his equipment and expertise can help make sense of this mystical 1/4.
My own brother, who I haven't talked to in years, calls me up at 4 a.m. and tells me he needs my tools. Go figure.
Through their careful and more ambitious measurement attempts, Tom's funny and charming personality shines through as he connects with the kids and cracks jokes with the family, and there seems to be an incremental reconnection between the brothers. However, the two of them are still unable to figure out where their measurements are going wrong. At the same time, Karen is embarking on her own home improvement project, installing a bookshelf inside the small new space, flush with the walls on either side, so the walls act as sort of built-in bookends. Trust me, that detail will be important in a moment. Still unsuccessful in their attempts, Will and Tom recruit family friend Billy Reston to help their efforts, a university professor who is the subject of one of Navidson's more notable photographs, a power line accident which left him with waist-down paralysis. He provides his expertise and expensive university equipment, which still, in the end, much to Billy Reston's frustration, cannot seem to debunk the fact that the house is indeed bigger on the inside, a fact that Reston calls goddamn spatial. A pretty obscene turn of phrase, but one that I think might actually be really important in some of our discussions later, so pin that as well. Finally, after some instrument adjustments, the group gets a measurement they seem to like. There we go, resolved. It must have just been a problem with the equipment then. And it is at that exact moment that a book falls from the new foot of space between the wall and the bookshelf. The space has grown. Karen is the first to notice. She screams. Zampanò has some very detailed writing about this part of the film, but his aside about echoes and space are perhaps the most compelling. He comes at this concept from various different angles, but the gist is how the sound of echoes imply both an enormity of space, but also a structure. Something the sound is bouncing off of. And though the sound of an echo can be eerie, the lack of an echo, the lack of some implied structure, can be even more terrifying. When a pebble falls down a well, it is gratifying to hear the eventual plunk. However, if the pebble only slips into darkness and vanishes without a sound, the effect is disquieting. These thoughts on echo and spatial enormity will become starkly relevant to later parts of the film, as we'll see. Seeing as we're already over here, we might as well check in on Johnny Truant's thoughts during this portion. For one, we continue to see Johnny relay fairly intimate details of his personal life in these footnotes, reflecting on the fact that though he lives a very party rock lifestyle, he deeply craves something more, something that's roomy, and it's drenched in sunlight, and it's weightless, and I know it's not cheap, probably not even real. And as the manuscript begins pulling him into darker places mentally, the only thing that really brings him a sense of comfort is a stripper that comes around the tattoo shop where he works as an apprentice, for whom he has developed a serious infatuation, despite not knowing much about her, never having been to the place she works, only having spoken a few words to her, and not even knowing her name, referring to her only as Thumper in reference to a lower abdomen tattoo she has of a bunny. On the note of Disney, it's a weird detail that is nevertheless worth mentioning for later. She facetiously says the tattoo is just above the happiest place on earth. Wink wink haha. Talk about Disney adult, you know what I'm talking. Despite this distant comfort, the effects of the writing on Johnny's psyche seem to be increasing. He relates more and more passages to himself and his own life, and begins experiencing something strange. While at work in the tattoo shop, he is overcome with a dark feeling, which elevates quickly into the fear and panic that some monster, some massive thing, is right behind him and poised for attack. Some tremendous beast crouched off in the shadows, muscles a-twitch from firing its great mass forward, ragged claws slowly extending, digging into the linoleum. He whips around, filled with adrenaline, to find that, of course, there's nothing there. Eventually, his feelings fall back to the more manageable sensations of dread. What is also worth noting is what occurs almost right after this. He feels as though he's forgotten something, some memory that surfaced but then went away just as quickly, and he describes this sensation being like a woman in a dark room.
Something in her movement or perfume is disturbingly familiar, though how familiar is impossible to tell because by the time I realize she's someone I should know, she's already gone, deep into the din, taking with her any chance of recognition. Though she hasn't left, she's still there, embracing shadows. Is that it? Had I been thinking of a woman? I hope it doesn't matter. I have a terrifying feeling it does.
As we will continue to see, the proximity Johnny's relationships with women has to these dark and terrifying feelings the writing conjures will be important to our analysis of both these works later on, so it is worth keeping in mind. On a personal note, I can't help but relate to this feeling a bit. I've read through this manuscript plenty of times in the past, but now that I'm digging this deep and really thinking on it, and maybe it's just the addition of all these clips that were thought to be lost, I find myself alone as I'm working on this, feeling like a pair of eyes is on the back of my head sometimes. I don't know, I guess I'm just an easy scare.
Yggdrasil. What miracle is this? This giant tree. It stands 10,000 feet high, but doesn't reach the ground. Still it stands. Its roots must hold the sky. Though disturbing, this shifting, bigger on the inside house leaves little actionable steps forward, so eventually Billy and Tom have to go their separate ways. And in some ways, so do Karen and Will. The tension and distance they came here to overcome only increases with time, disappearing into their own worlds. Navidson still obsessing over the house, and Karen trying her best to avoid talking about it, becoming even more closed off.
But the two are forced into confrontation with the house yet again when, one evening, the two parents, off in their own parts of the house, hear the sound of their children's voices, Chad and Daisy, echoing in some distant corner. Echoing. A moment of realization hits the two at the same time as they realize there is no room in the house that should permit such an echo.
They rush to the sound emanating from the living room to find yet another new door, extending into a black hallway. Navidson rushes in after the kids, but Karen stops at the doorway, unable to move, frozen in fear.
Now seems to be as good a time as any to bring up a bit of context surrounding Karen Green that makes this entire debacle even more horrific for her specifically. Karen Green has discussed in the past, and even directly in parts of the Navidson Record, a genuinely crippling struggle with claustrophobia, avoiding elevators, closets, any small and dark space. There could not have been a more personally crafted horror for Karen Green than a house that is suddenly filling with new, dark, and cramped spaces.
Zampanò draws from outside sources to further analyze this fact. Apparently, around the same time in childhood she developed her claustrophobia, some of those close to her noticed a certain dramatic change in personality, even down to how she would smile. From someone who is outgoing and unself-conscious to more reserved and intentional. Her sister even claiming that she spent every night of her 14th year composing her smile in front of a blue plastic mirror.
Many have speculated about what it is that caused her claustrophobia, some trauma that explains it, but Karen has never gone into the details herself. Her sister has made more claims on this note as well, but for now I'll refrain from spending too much time on the tabloidy stuff and focus on what happens next within the film itself. Will Navidson returns from the hallway with both the children, neither of which seem particularly upset. Will and Karen are, however, obviously very shaken. Karen makes Will promise to never enter the hallway again, and he tentatively agrees.
Tom returns, installing locks and a door on the new living room doorway. Karen, meanwhile, dives down the rabbit hole of feng shui, reading and redecorating, hoping to stave off or fix the aura of darkness the house seems to carry. And it is around this point that the events of the 5.5-minute hallway occur, this section from which it was cut. Where the doorway upstairs had created only a small bit of space between two rooms, this new hallway in the living room leads to an entire impossible corridor of darkness, covered floor to ceiling in some featureless ashen material, extending out into what should be the yard, but cannot be seen from the other side. like a portal. And this little tape, this section that got shared around, is just Navidson showcasing that fact.
As days pass, the disconnect between Will and Karen grows.
Doesn't he see that I don't want him going in there because I love him? You don't need to be a genius to realize there's something really bad about that place. The only thing I want to do is go in there. But she's adamant that I don't, and I love her so I won't. But, well, it's just killing me. If he goes in there, I'm out of here, kids and all. If she keeps up this cold front, you bet I'm going in there.
One night in particular, the couple has 2 friends over for dinner, and despite Karen's hesitancy, Will decides to show them the hallway.
Expecting the same kind of macabre wonderment he has gained from the architectural anomaly, his friends are instead immediately disturbed and leave not long after.
Karen sends Will to sleep on the couch that night, unknowingly setting Will up with the perfect opportunity and excuse to do what he's been hoping for all along. Rather unceremoniously for what a large step this is, Navidson grabs a camera and a flashlight and sneaks inside that cold, dark hallway.
What he believes initially to be a short passage winds and twists and grows until he is navigating essentially just inky blackness. Rooms branch and change, ceilings and walls extend to supermassive heights and size. The place he has found himself within is clearly more expansive and labyrinthian than he ever could have suspected. And when he attempts to turn back, the path has changed. He finds some of the same featureless rooms and areas, but their order and distance has shifted. We watch the blurry darkness as his breathing becomes more terrified, walking turning to running, and it is then that we first hear the growl. Its source is unknown, it seems all-consuming, surging through the hallways. Finally, Navidson begins to hear the voice of his daughter, Daisy, in the distance, echoing through the darkness.
Using her voice as a guide, he eventually is able to find himself at the threshold of the doorway once again, Daisy crying out for him from the living room. He's escaped. Though Karen's reaction of horror and avoidance at first seemed like the only rational one, we should keep in mind Will Navidson's background. An ambitious photographer of the war-torn and devastated parts of the world, having confronted innumerous dangers in pursuit of documenting the harshest parts of life in hopes of making a difference. The opportunity to explore and capture an entirely new frontier of darkness placed right at his feet is understandably captivating for a man of Navidson's disposition and background. What is most intriguing about how the house affects those who encounter its anomalous design is how it draws out specific inner conflicts for each person individually, as well as conflicts between persons. Its allure leads Navidson to almost getting trapped inside, and its dark, cramped spaces leaves Karen in utter terror, but it also draws out conflicts in the two's priorities and anxieties that wedge them further apart from each other. And the effects of the house clearly don't just stop with those literally inside it. Going back to some of Johnny Truant's footnotes, it's clear at this point that the book's effects are getting in the way of his everyday life.
As he details around this time, he was filling up bottles of ink at work inside a dark storage closet at the top of some narrow stairs, when he is suddenly taken back to that sense of terror, that assured feeling that some creature is watching him, is about to get him. This time it's human. Maybe not. Extremely long fingers, a sucking sound too, sucking on teeth already torn from gums, a scream, a howl, a roar, all's warping or splintering, everything falls apart. The shape of a shape of a shape of a face disassembling right before my eyes. As he rushes to leave the closet, he tumbles down the stairs, ink spilling and wind thoroughly knocked out.
Notice here how this particular, for lack of a better term, panic attack was conjured specifically by entering a dark, cramped space like the ones within the Navidson Record, and the howling he describes seems oddly paralleled by the growl heard by Navidson inside the hallway. And aside from his descriptions of a monster, Johnny often describes these episodes of fear and dread as analogous to passageways extending out in his head.
Inside me, a long dark hallway already caressed the other music of a single word, and what's worse, despite the amazement of chemicals, continued to grow.
I point this out because it's important to understand that the house in its effects and even existence aren't entirely physical, even literal. Though Johnny has never stepped foot inside the house on Ash Tree Lane, what he finds within the pages of Zampanò's writings open the doors of the house within his mind. Reading accounts of it carry a similar effect to being inside it. It's no coincidence that the word passages refers both to hallways and paragraphs. The book can act as the house, as can our minds, as much as the walls of the actual house. The mental effect is the same. And inside, though for Johnny it is imaginary, something monstrous may reside. But how imaginary is Johnny's monster, really? Zampanò's room was left with mysterious claw marks, and near the end of this footnote about falling down the stairs, Johnny remarks,
"Later, a patron points out the long, bloody scratch on the back of my neck. I'm unable to respond."
Though I'm sure we'd all like to get back to the Navidson Record, it is at this point I'd like us to move to one of the many appendices of the most recent edition of House of Leaves. Specifically, because the editors of the book, the ones who actually take the manuscript Johnny organizes and creates footnotes for and then publishes it, suggest we do. They add at the very end of Johnny Truant's story about falling down the stairs,
"Those who feel they would profit from a better understanding of Mr. Truant's past may wish to proceed ahead and read his father's obituary, as well as those letters written by his institutionalized mother in Appendix 2E.
Again, due to the connection between Johnny's writings in the Navidson Record and how much our knowledge of what happens in the Navidson Record relies on his interpretation and input, this seems a noteworthy aside. Flipping to the appendices, Johnny's father's obituary doesn't reveal too much. He was a career pilot named Donnie, who lost his license after discovering a heart issue and so began working at a trucking company. He was a passenger in a Mack truck when the driver fell asleep at the wheel and swerved into a ditch. It's tragic but brief, and what follows is a much lengthier piece. The Whalestoe Letters. Patreon.com/SaganHawks is where you can support me if you like these videos. There's exclusive videos, commentary, tracks, Q&As, early access, and behind the scenes, starting at only $2, and it helps me do things like take a really long time to make this giant House of Leaves video, and pay for this little dollhouse. Thanks. The Whalestoe Letters are a series of correspondence sent to Johnny Truant from his mother, Pelafina, while she was institutionalized at the Three-Attic Whalestoe Institute between July of 1982 and May of 1989. We're not provided with any of Johnny's return letters, though they are referenced by Pelafina within hers. And as much as these reveal about Pelafina's story, they also reveal some pretty stark details of Johnny's history as well. And oddly, there are connections to be found in everything from the Navidson Record to Zampanò's writings, which call into question the authorship, authenticity, or even supernaturality of the events described in all of this, and how they're intertwined, like the knotted roots of a tree. Pelafina writes often throughout this 7-year span, but Johnny's responses are sporadic. Still, we can get a good picture of Johnny's life from her letters alone. Pelafina was institutionalized when Johnny was about 7 years old, for a condition that's never named but Pelafina describes as
"My wild and often, I'm afraid to admit, hallucinatory condition. Sad but true, sometimes your mother hears things."
After his father's death, Johnny was sent to various foster families, but as one might expect, struggled to integrate into them, and regularly engaged in fairly brutal fights at his different schools. Eventually, he landed in the care of a family patriarched by an abusive former Marine, Raymond, who we find out is responsible for some of Johnny's scars and his missing tooth.
"Did he really break your nose, snap your teeth? Are there still contusions on your face? I confess even having to write these questions stirs a frenzy in the chambers of my soul. I would like nothing more than to tear out the liver of your purported protector and feed it to him with a hiss. He could semperfy that meal all the way to Hades."
Eventually, Johnny escaped by enrolling himself in boarding school and then as a teenager working in Alaska for the summer. Throughout this time, Pelafina writes of her wishes that Johnny would come visit her, but for various reasons, Johnny has not up until now. But on May 21st, 1985, just before he goes off to Alaska, he finally visits her at the Institute. It should be noted, even this early on in these letters, the intensity of their mother-son connection is very clear. Pelafina writes so adoringly about Johnny and encourages him to defend himself physically, but most of all to use his mind. And it becomes immediately clear where Johnny gets his writing style that we see throughout the footnotes of House of Leaves. Pelafina writes in winding poetic passages filled with literary references and phrases in other languages from Latin to Old English.
Your letter is not paper and pencil, it is glass, a perfectly ground glass in which I can endlessly gaze upon my fine young boy, unleashing arrows like some Apollo, scrambling across cliffs like the agile and ever-wily Odysseus, not surprisingly besting his peers in mad dashes by the shores of that turquoise lake you described. Hermes once again pattering on Terra, and to top it all off, a kite of your own construction still drifting among the temples of Olympus. Their separation from one another has clearly been traumatic for the both of them.
Though she's clearly eccentric, we don't see much explicit evidence of Pelafina's hallucinations or psychosis manifesting concretely until a bit further into the letters, when she begins discussing how the old director of the Institute has been replaced by the new director, who she now believes to be scheming to keep her from recovering. That the medicine she is being given is causing her to lose her memories, and that she has had some grand plan revealed to her.
They will stop short of nothing to forbid my revelations. What I know will untie the world. No wonder the doors here are all locked. Not long after, Pelafina sends a letter pleading for Johnny to visit her again. However, right after this, Pelafina seems to receive a letter from Johnny saying he did in fact visit her again within the last month, to which she responds, "Either some marauding rabbit devoured the leaves of my memory and thus deprived me of the sweet sight of you, or the woman you lingered with was not me. The new director must have hired a professional, trained her, a professional actress, surgically altered her, and then after many months of rehearsal introduced her to you as the very same soul of your breath, source of your being." Her anxieties grow as she tries different methods to send messages out in secret. Place in your next letter a check mark in the lower right-hand corner. That way I'll know you've received this letter.
Pelafina's desperation comes to a horrifying zenith when she writes to Johnny in a code, the first letter of each word building the actual words of her message. Fair warning, from here on we really get to the darkest parts of this story.
They have found a way to break me. A 56-year-old bag of bones. There is no worse, and don't believe otherwise. Someone I don't know always comes when it's dark, late. You must save me, Johnny. In the name of your father, I must escape this place or I will die.
Though the reality of what she writes is often a gray area, I don't want to take anything away from the fact that this seems a perfectly realistic thing to imagine happening at a psychiatric institute where the patients are held involuntarily. From this point on, her letters become more unstable, twisting around the page, her despair bleeding into the paper in disconnected passages.
I live at the end of some interminable corridor which the lucky damned can call hell, but which the much unluckier atheists, and your mother heads up that bunch, must simply get used to calling home. My hands resemble some ancient tree, the roots that bind up the earth, the rock, and the ceaselessly nibbling wordums. And within these writings, there are more revelations about Johnny's scars. It was an accident. I never meant to burn you. You were only 4 and I was terrible in the kitchen. I'm sorry. So sorry. So very sorry. Forgive me.
As Johnny illuminates in his own footnotes not much later, the scars on his arms are burns from a boiling pot accidentally dropped when he was 4. It's traumatic, yes, a gruesome accident, but in the end, an accident. What Pelafina reveals next is much darker.
Do not forget your father stopped me and took me to the Whalestoe. You may remember, you may not. You were 7. It was the last time I saw you before I saw you again too many years later, only to lose sight of you again. How can you ever understand the awful weight of living, so ridiculously riddled with so many lies of tranquility and bliss, at best half covering but never actually erasing the crushing weight of it all? You were leaving as I was leaving, and so I tried before that great leaving to grant you the greatest gift of all, the gift to end all gifts. I kissed kissed your cheeks and your head, and after a while put my hands around your throat, but you didn't struggle the way I anticipated. You probably understood what I was doing for you. You were probably grateful. I'll never know how close you came to that fabled edge because your father suddenly arrived and roared an intervention. You were a mess, but aside from a few evil coughs and dirty little pants and some half-moon cuts on the back of your neck, you recovered quickly enough. I did not. Perhaps my shame should really come from my failure.
And suddenly, the monster Johnny feels in his mind, the one that awaits behind him and leaves half-moon cuts on the back of his neck, begins to take shape. Why his relationships with women seem to be followed by a darkness which opens long-suppressed passageways of memory. And then, on November 1st, 1988, Pelafina sends this letter.
What a terrible sleep and dream I have been roused from. There are so many pieces to make sense of. The doctors all warned me to just put aside the last 2 years. It's a shambles. It seems I'm better off consigning the whole lot to psychosis, locking it up, throwing away the keys. The director has already warned me that my lucidity may not last forever. In fact, it's unlikely. I shall be fine as long as I know the one whose tender sensibilities I impose such hogwash on will forgive me. How could I misplace your visits, lose your letters, not even recognize you? I love you so very much.
She is seemingly awakened from her episode, though one must wonder if the officials there are using this to convince her that some of the things she experienced in reality didn't happen. It turns out the new director was in fact the same director the entire time. Johnny visits her during this term of lucidity, which seems to be a rather pleasant meeting. But by January, the director sends Johnny a letter informing him that her state may decline again, as well as revealing he really will be retiring and a new director replacing him in the coming months. In contrast to the director's information, Pelafina continues to write that her condition is improving, and that she may even recover so well that she'll be able to leave, and she begins making plans for it. For the first time, I feel normal. In May of 1989, Pelafina sends a final letter.
I cannot tire myself on the feelings of the world. I am leaving after all, though it is no easy task, especially for this old Sibyl of Cumae. Climbs of any kind are trying. Frankly, I'm exhausted by all the planning and paperwork. Donnie will pick me up soon, very soon. But you, my dear child, you should stay for a while. Do that for me.
2 days later, Johnny receives a letter from the director.
We regret to inform you that on May 4th, 1989, at approximately 8:45 p.m., your mother, Pelafina Heather Lievre, died in her room at the 3-attic Whalestoe Institute. After a detailed examination, both by our resident doctor as well as the county coroner, confirmed the cause of death was the result of self-inflicted asphyxiation achieved with bed linens hanging from a closet hook.
Obviously, there is a lot to unpack here, but I think these letters do paint a pretty vivid picture of what led Johnny to where he is now, and how this book seems to be affecting him. First, it is again important to note how the house on Ash Tree Lane seems to manifest itself symbolically in the form of books, trees, pages, and the internal mind, and how it pulls the specific darkness and trauma out of each individual who stumbles upon it. Each one of us has a house, and for Johnny that appears to be this very traumatic history. And the connections found within these letters run rather deep, deeper than one might expect. Of course, there's Pelafina's references to things like trees and certain metaphors she includes.
My hands resemble some ancient tree, the roots that bind up the earth, the rock, and the ceaselessly nibbling wordums. Some marauding rabbit devoured the leaves of my memory.
Further drawing connections between all these elements. But there are also very strange and specific connections to the writings of Zampanò and the Navidson Record. In a letter from September 7th, 1984, she writes,
To endure over 2 months without a word, and then with the first words learn such terrible news tore me to Pisces.
A typo, which is also found on page 41 of Zampanò's House of Leaves, during the previously mentioned analysis of sound and echoes.
Echo, however, rejects his amorous offers, and Pan, being the god of civility and restraint, tears her to Pisces, burying all of her except her voice.
A coincidence? An edit made by Johnny intentionally to make this connection? Or perhaps Pelafina and Zampanò are more connected than we realize, and it wasn't such an accident that Johnny Truant found the manuscript. All things worth keeping in mind, and I wonder if it's no coincidence that the specific connective tissue on Zampano's end is a mythological anecdote where the character Echo is stripped of her entire being except her voice, just as Pelafina has been locked away in the Whalestoe, her only connection to Johnny, her words. Additionally, Pelafina makes two oddly specific comments which feel directly connected to the events of the Navidson Record. On September 5th, 1985, she wrote about Johnny's father, Donnie, who you'll remember was a pilot by profession.
I honestly don't believe he heard all the rattling and wind whipping and the awful shuddering sounds the plane made. I wish I could have his peace now. I wish I didn't have to hear the rattle and the roar and the scream that is your silence.
Feels awfully evocative of the growl of the house, no? But even more specific, in April of 1986, she signs off with,
practicing my smile in a mirror the way I did when I was a child.
This seems too specific a parallel with Karen Green supposedly doing the exact same thing as a child, described in almost the exact same words, to be a coincidence, and it is not the last connection to be found between these two people. The problem with the nature of these entwined stories, especially with Johnny's admitted editing of Zampano's writing, is we can never really be sure which direction these connections come from. If they've been changed by Johnny, or Johnny's been changed by them, which again is why we must hold the conflicting position that all these explanations might be true. As this is a running theme in this analysis, it seems worth a mention that this is the very position Pelafina found herself in, struggling with memory and hallucinations, unsure of which version of reality to trust. I hope you can see, especially with these connections made directly to the Navidson Record, how important taking into account Johnny Truant's life is, and why these sometimes quite lengthy asides are worth taking. That is definitely not the last we'll be talking about the Whalestoe Letters, but for now, I think it's time we return to the film.
The papers all say that Johnny is truant, and his mother's reportedly ruined. He's gone to the wind, God knows how he's sinned, 'cause in Latin he's practically fluent.
Reinforcements arrive at the house on Ash Tree Lane in the form of a man named Holloway Roberts and his two companions, Jed Leader and Kirby Wax Hook. They arrive without much fanfare in the film itself, but upon first glance, there seems no one more fit for the job of exploring the house than these three. Holloway Roberts, a friend of Billy Reston, is a middle-aged career hunter and explorer who made a living venturing places most would never dare. Jed Leader is a reserved but talented backpacker with a remarkable sense of direction, and Wax Hook, a young climbing prodigy. With them, they bring plenty of supplies, from lights and markers and a radio to Holloway's Weatherby rifle. They seem prepared for anything, though they arrive with a sense of perhaps arrogant confidence. Upon being introduced to the Holloway, the team is almost immediately sobered. Holloway, however, seems uniquely confrontational, approaching the house as yet another peak to conquer.
It is also worth noting that, though I don't have very much footage of this portion of the film, it is noted by those who've seen it, including Zampanò, that Holloway and Navidson seem to bristle at each other's presence, which isn't entirely surprising for these two kinds of guys. Navidson having a notably more renowned career in a similarly dangerous field, and Holloway taking point on an exploration Navidson has been precluded from that is his discovery within his very own home, and he would clearly rather be undertaking for himself. And it doesn't help that Karen seems to be flirting with Holloway as soon as he arrives. As with every step in their descent so far, these events only strain their relationship further. On the note of how the house's effects seem to spread between people, there's some very interesting anecdotes provided by Johnny in the footnotes around this time. But first, Johnny updates us on his relationship with Thumper, having written a flowery love note and handing it to her in person in front of everyone at the tattoo shop. Alright, buddy. As one might expect, she doesn't react exactly the way Johnny was hoping.
I don't even know what I expected, but she opened it right on the spot and then laughed, and then my boss grabbed it and he sort of winced.
But amazingly, on her way out, she hands him her card.
Call me sometime. You're cute.
However, Johnny's uncharacteristic shyness around Thumper keeps him from calling her until 3 in the morning, to which she doesn't answer, obviously. It is moments like this that make you remember, despite the grand prose and cynical outlook, Johnny is still very young, around 25 at this point, but this sends Johnny into yet another depressive spiral.
I started drinking. I'm still drinking.
He goes on, falling into this drunken spiral, as he often does within these footnotes, until he reaches a relevant anecdote, a story he was told by one of the volunteers who used to read and write for Zampanò. As a side note, that's been another goal of his, tracking down those volunteers to get information about the manuscript.
One of Zampanò's early readers also found a story she wanted to avoid, though she finally told me it, or at least some of it, having just endured hours of speech on comfort, death, and legend, all of it distressing her, saddening her, confusing her, and thus leaving her completely unprepared for the memory she was about to find. Abruptly returning from her childhood in Santa Cruz, suddenly noticing the unnatural heaviness of a shadow slipping free from the burnt dusk, though not a shadow at all, later translating this as the sight of an enormous creature trespassing on the curve of a Northern California night, like the shadow she saw hiding in the bottom of a turn at Zampanò's stairwell, moving towards her, and so causing her to panic and scramble into the comforts offered by a local bar.
This is exactly why we can't be content to simply understand the house as just the physical house itself, but something more metaphysical that can reach people through the written word, or spoken, I suppose. Almost like a cognito hazard, there's something inherent to that place that, if unable to unlock physical passageways, will open them in the mind, and altogether come from one's own traumas and memories. And that goes for the Navidson Green story as well. Though they've mostly been dealing with these effects on a literal level, we've seen how they open specific relationship wounds, the very ones they came here to leave behind. At the very least, how they pull out a specific trauma and phobia for Karen. The architecture of the house is a monster in the corner of your eye just as much as it is a hallway, as much as it is a long-suppressed thought. Johnny ends this footnote.
And so now, in the shadow of unspoken events, I watch Zampanò's courtyard darken. Everything whimsical has left. The old man is not there, and the cats are all gone. Something else has taken their place. Something I am unable to see. Waiting. I'm afraid. It is hungry. It is immortal. Worse, it knows nothing of whim.
The Holloway team's first preliminary trek is titled Exploration 1, and is relatively short, all things considered, mostly retracing Navidson's steps, though with brighter lights they reveal further the enormity of that place.
But before they can explore much further, they run out of the spool of fishing line they're using as a lifeline to find their way back, and the growl of the house spooks them into turning around. And as with Navidson's Exploration A, the path back is slightly different than the path that got them there, though it doesn't prove too difficult a return. Really, this first exploration was an introduction, so Holloway and crew can get an idea of what they're dealing with. Exploration 2 is considerably longer.
The team enters for the second time the following day, equipped with more flares, neon markers, sample tubes, and plenty more fishing lines. Still, in the hours that follow, they only hear the growl once more, and the shifting of the house is limited.
The team makes their way through what they call the anteroom, a massive space that seems without end, only to open up into an even greater expanse, what they call the Great Hall, a room which is probably at least a mile long. And it is here that they discover the first architectural change from the monotony of hours of featureless floor, ceiling, and walls of different dimensions. An enormous spiral staircase, twisting downward into the darkness.
We dropped a few flares down it, but never heard them hit bottom. I mean, in that place, it being so empty and cold and still and all, you can really hear a pin drop, but the darkness just swallowed the flares right up.
The team emerges 8 hours after they entered, and I hope that can give you an idea of just how massive that space is. Miles and miles of dark passageways and featureless rooms, more akin to a cave system than a house. And just like a cave, there doesn't even need to be a monster or creature inside. Its sheer enormity and emptiness create a danger of starvation, of exposure, or madness, not to mention it's freezing cold inside. Navidson, for his part, is noticeably agitated by the whole experience, clearly tortured by the fact that he's been excluded from making such discoveries. He can't even bother to pretend to be excited, literally leaving the room when Holloway and team returns to present the footage. Though one can criticize Navidson's dramatics, it's understandable that this would at least weigh on him, essentially sacrificing what could be the most astonishing discovery of his career and crowning achievement of his passion not from his own hesitation, but Karen's. Though again, you can't really blame her. Again, I'm basically on her side. The penultimate exploration 3 is even longer, lasting over 20 hours.
The team reaching the giant spiral stairwell and descending down it for 7 straight hours, with no sign of the bottom. Even at their lowest point, their flares disappear into the nothingness. No reassuring echo to greet them at the bottom of the well, as Zampanò might say. The excitement of this discovery has considerably waned among the crew, as they return nearly a full day later, exhausted, no closer to reaching whatever unspecific end or goal they're looking for. Still, with each passing step down, the impossible enormity of the space becomes clearer.
Meanwhile, Karen makes an unsettling discovery of her own. Still elbow deep in her feng shui redecoration, she finds that compasses will not settle when within the house, and Holloway confirms this is the case inside the hallways as well. Upon the crew's return, Navidson and Holloway are actually able to put their guards down a bit and build some brief camaraderie over the idea of the success and acclaim their discoveries here will likely afford them. Though the idea of drawing out their time with this house any longer is clearly an unpleasant thought for Karen. As for the children, Daisy seems relatively unfazed by everything, but Chad is noticeably absent from the home much of the time, and we learn that he's begun getting into fights at school, which is familiar. Again, the depths that knowing Johnny Truant's story adds to the Navidson Record are undeniable, but the exact nature of these parallels remains mysterious. Either way, we see that Chad's older age may leave him more susceptible to the effects of the house, as his mind is developing a more complex, self-conscious understanding of himself. On this note, now would be a good time to return to some of Johnny's footnotes around this time, as they seem especially relevant.
Firstly, in another drunken night out with Lude, Johnny almost found himself in another brawl, interrupted in a bit of mutual flirtation with a woman named Kyrie by her monstrous boyfriend.
Well, look at that, I remember hollering. He has an opposable thumb. He was twice my size, bigger and stronger. Luckily, the alcohol returned. I got wobbly and then I got scared. Lude was yelling at me. You got a death wish, Truant? Which was the thing that scared me. 'Cause maybe I did.
By coincidence, he ends up meeting this Kyrie woman again, looking for her help translating some German in Zampanò's manuscript. Though, as is characteristically Johnny, their interaction ends with the two of them hooking up, Kyrie telling him her boyfriend is in Gdansk, Poland on a work trip. Afterwards, she breaks down, briefly telling Johnny how she feels unloved by her boyfriend before kicking him out. He never got that translation. Unfortunately for Johnny, this will not be the last time he runs into Kyrie or her boyfriend, which Johnny takes to calling the Gdansk man. Not long after sharing this story, Johnny gives us a much starker picture of what happened between him and his foster father, Raymond, before his escape to boarding school or Alaska.
It begins with Raymond taking to calling Johnny Beast, and after word of Johnny's fights at school and his pushing,
I was 12 years old. What did I know? I pushed all the time.
Raymond awakened Johnny in the middle of the night to tell him,
You're not really in this family, but you're living with this family. So what does that make you? That makes you a guest, and being a guest means you act like a guest, not like some kind of barnyard animal. If that doesn't suit you, then I'll treat you like an animal, which will have to suit you. It goes for that school too. I don't want no more problems.
And as Johnny tells it,
the next day I fought in the schoolyard until my knuckles were bloody, and then I fought the following day and the day after that. After the 10th fight, something really poisonous got inside me and turned off all the pain. I didn't even register a hit or cut anymore. So I just kept hacking back, spending everything I was against what I still didn't know.
And so, Johnny was eventually expelled, and upon his return home from school, Raymond tells him to
get in the truck. I asked him where we were going. I'm taking you to the hospital, he finally whispered. But we didn't go directly to the hospital. Raymond took me somewhere else first, where I lost half my tooth, and a lot more too, I guess, on the outskirts, in an ice-covered place, surrounded by barbed wire and willows, where mountains of rust, seldom touched, lie frozen alongside fence posts, and no one ever comes near enough to hear the hawks cry.
The trauma Johnny Truant lived through in his childhood is horrific, and though to be fully honest, he comes off at times in his writing as rather pretentious or unlikable, sometimes even misogynistic in the way he objectifies women. As a reader, one cannot help but root for his ability to overcome. I mean, you look at his life, and it is completely understandable that he didn't come out particularly well-adjusted. At the same time, one has to wonder whether this trauma is being drawn out by his exposure to this book, or whether it is him projecting his trauma onto the manuscript, as a way to try and make sense of how it affects him. Additionally, one has to wonder if there's some link between his mother's hallucinatory condition and his recent run-ins with shadow monsters, though the scratches and testimonies from Zampano's writers throw a bit of a wrench into the simplicity of that explanation. Then again, we only know about these things because Johnny wrote them down. Who knows how much of this can even be trusted? As is the inherent struggle with analyzing the Navidson Record without having access to the film itself. It all gets tangled up so easily. It's like there's a dozen different pathways we could go down, these ideas fracturing into different hallways, but we don't have enough light to see what's at the other end of any of them. But we can't look away even for a second. Don't even blink. I think I might need coffee or something.
Exploration 4 is planned as the longest yet, Holloway and the team spending 4 to 5 days inside those darkened halls, hoping that will give enough time to reach the bottom of the stairs and come back alive.
They re-up on as many supplies as they can carry, and due to their experience with the radios from their last trip, unfortunately concede to the fact that after the first day or so, they likely won't have contact with the home base that has been set up in the living room. Additionally, though Navidson believes that the growl sound is actually the result of the house's shifting layout, emanating from impossible corners and Escherian surfaces scraping against each other, Holloway seems unconvinced, apparently set on finding something that inhabits that place. The Minotaur in the maze. In any case, the rest of the team agrees that it's better safe than sorry, so Holloway's rifle comes along with them, locked and loaded.
The night before Exploration 4 is to take place, Wax and Karen find themselves alone in the kitchen together, and in their slightly awkward conversation, Wax reveals Navidson's Exploration A to Karen. Karen doesn't seem to react at first, but as they continue their conversation, it becomes more personal, until there's a moment where Wax seems to believe they've made some kind of connection, and he leans in and kisses her. And though Wax started it, Zampanò writes that Karen's enthusiasm almost overpowers his.
In fact, the kiss turns into something more than a kiss.
But it ends just as quickly as it began. Karen leaves without a word, and Wax doesn't follow.
It seems hard to imagine something like this would have happened without Navidson's betrayal in Exploration A. And though there could have been any number of reasons for her reaction, revenge, desperation, anger, here it becomes clear that the relationship between Karen and Navidson is truly beginning to fall apart.
We don't see Exploration 4 from the team's perspective at first. For the first day or so, Navidson shoots Billy Reston as he rolls between the radio and computer monitoring systems. Though not literally placing us within the expedition, this angle almost gives a more immersive sense of the house's void. Centering Reston and Navidson's perspective of being stuck on one end of an opaque glass feels like a much truer darkness. While we watch the rest of the inhabitants try to make themselves busy or take their minds off the expedition, playing with the kids or getting into busy work, Reston works with meticulous focus as he mans the living room's home base.
At the 7-day mark, those at the house have heard nothing from Holloway and crew, and they fear the worst. And that night, a sound is heard.
Knocking, an SOS signal, echoing through the house, vibrating across unknown miles of walls to reach them.
Despite Karen's distress and disapproval, Tom, Navidson, and Reston decide to head out on a rescue mission, under the assumption that there isn't any time to waste calling for backup. It needs to happen right then and there.
Reston will follow Tom and Navidson to the staircase and set up a relay station between the living room and the rest of the house beneath the stairs, while Tom and Navidson follow in the rest of the team's footsteps.
Though I haven't spoken much much about Zampano's writing itself up to this point, it's important to note that in the following sections of this book, the formatting transforms this fairly straightforward academic piece into what House of Leaves is probably most known for: a piece of ergodic literature.
Scattering the text, condensing the formatting, making the pages even more an extension of the maze-like quality of the house. In fact, it probably cannot be understated how important it is that so much of our information about the film comes from Zampano's writing, another perspective interpreting and obscuring the events. And Zampano proves himself anything but an objective POV, as we'll see. First and foremost, when the chapter covering this part of the film opens with a page that has a little checkmark in the bottom right corner, a signifier that, if you recall, Johnny's mother asked him to include in response to her distress letter, her own SOS.
Is this Johnny once again tampering with the text? Or is this more evidence that Zampano and Pelafina are connected? There's no way to really be sure in either case. But keep in mind, Zampano's writing and analysis will become a much more important piece of this overall puzzle going forward. To stay on Johnny for a moment here, he continues to have difficulty leaving his apartment, and we learn that he has received a message from a woman named Ashley, who he doesn't remember, but apparently knows him. More importantly to him, though, he has spoken to Thumper again. At the tattoo parlor, he tells stories to Thumper and his boss about his time in Alaska, lying about his age at 13 to get a job as a fishing canner, long, grueling 12-hour days, and one day, going aboard a fishing vessel, which would tragically sink.
Almost everyone survived. One guy didn't, an old Haitian, at least 16 years old. He was a friend too, or at least on his way to becoming a friend. Some line had gotten tangled around his ankle, and he was dragged down with the wreck.
After work, Thumper and Johnny actually go out to dinner, and though things start out as casual and flirtatious, he can't stop himself from devolving into talking about Zampano and the book and all of these difficulties. But Thumper isn't off-put by this, listening intently and comforting him in a very platonic way before they part ways.
"You're all right, Johnny," she said for the second time that night. "Don't worry so much. You're still young. You'll be fine. Come down and see me at work sometime. If you want my opinion, you just need to get out of the house."
Teehee.
Returning to Zampano, the following chapter doesn't focus entirely on the rest of the events of Exploration 4 or the rescue mission, instead taking an aside to analyze the events of the Navidson Record and the nature of the house through the lens of a labyrinth in its mythological and literary contexts. Mostly the story of King Minos and the Minotaur. Throughout this entire chapter, and some further chapters, this analysis is woven in, but importantly, was initially scrapped and struck out by Zampano. We only see it because Johnny Truant salvaged and replaced the pieces. Why exactly Zampano would want to erase almost the entirety of this literary thread remains to be seen. Apart from a brief opening section that discusses how the perception from which we're viewing a labyrinth changes our understanding of it.
From within, a confusing claustrophobic path, from the outside, an intricate art piece of sorts.
Which does feel relevant to how each inhabitant reacts to, and as we'll see later, experiences the house. We move on to the meat of this discussion, the Minotaur. The first angle Zampano looks at the story of the Minotaur in the maze from is a sort of deconstruction, a retelling or reinterpretation, where King Minos' son is born with a congenital face abnormality, and King Minos creates the labyrinth and this myth of the Minotaur to keep people away and hide his son from the world. A hoax which inevitably backfires, leading Theseus into the maze to kill his son. There is special attention paid here to the idea that the Minotaur isn't actually a beast, but a soft and intelligent human being. It is very reminiscent of Borges' House of Asterion, a short story told from the Minotaur's perspective. And more than just an empathetic angle to the creature, Asterion, the Minotaur's house, the maze, is described in much the same way the house on Ash Tree Lane is.
"It is true that I never leave my house, but it is also true that its doors, whose numbers are infinite, are open day and night. All parts of the house are repeated many times. Any place is another place. There is no one pool, court, courtyard, drinking trough, manger. The mangers, drinking troughs, courtyards, pools are infinite in number.
If this all does truly come from Zampanò the way Johnny claims, he almost certainly got much of it from here. In any case, this humanization of the Minotaur in the maze seems relevant in 3 ways.
1. The idea of this narrative hoax being created by King Minos to hide some perceived shame, which eventually falls apart, is yet another example of this recurring notion that we cannot trust the stories we're being told, from Navidson to Zampanò to Johnny. 2. It is yet another example of a monster that is never really there. Holloway seems convinced he is chasing some real flesh and blood huntable thing within the labyrinth of the house, despite no real evidence of such thing existing. We also see the same experience with Johnny, feeling so sure some creature is right behind him, ready to attack, only to disappear when he turns around. For King Minos, again, this false monster represents his personal shame, in this case his son, this shame that he constructs into a monster. And I have to wonder if a similar theme will follow for Johnny and Holloway. Finally, I think there's a case to be made that Johnny has lived a life similar to the Minotaur. Seen by his stepfather as violent and worthless, literally called a beast, scarred since childhood, yet we read throughout his footnotes that beneath this gruff exterior is an intelligent person who craves peace and comfort after a lifetime of trauma and abuse. Trust me when I say, I don't make these connections lightly. All of them are further reinforced as we continue the film and the book, but for now, let's keep moving things along. To return to Johnny's footnotes in this section briefly, he continues his meetings and often one-night stands with Zampanò's various scribes and readers, but again finds it more and more difficult to leave his apartment by now, finding himself stuck in mental scenes of his own horrific death every time he steps outside.
I watched a truck veer from its lane, flatten a stop sign, desperately try to slow, momentarily redirect itself, and then in spite of all the brakes on that monster, all the accompanying smoke and ear-puncturing shrieks, it still barreled straight into me. All that steel was grinding into me, instantly pulverizing my legs, my pelvis, the metal from the grill wedging forward like kitchen knives, severing me from the waist down.
However, after a hookup that he retells in particularly graphic detail, he begins to feel a little bit better, as if getting outside and experiencing the world had really helped, like Thumper suggested.
Finally, we return to the details of Exploration 4, from Holloway and crew's perspective. Though we have a few sparse clips, we once again have to mostly go with Zampanò's recollection, which fully embraces its ergodic nature by this point. Swinging wildly from dense mirrored and winding passages to large empty pages with only a few words, pacing the read to match how it would feel to watch it play out for ourselves. On day 3, the exploration team had made it to the bottom of the stairs, and decide to continue peeking around a bit to see what's there. But as they do, Holloway begins to drive himself into almost a panic, worrying Jed and Wax. The further they go, the faster Holloway seems to move, making fewer stops and even busting holes in walls, hoping to find some exit, exterior, definition, or fixture within this place. But it continues to be nothing but nondescript rooms and hallways. When the team finally arrives back at the staircase, they find that one of the many return caches they left, supplies for them to use on their trip back, has seemingly been ripped apart, food and water torn to pieces or missing. This discovery sends Holloway into an almost manic fever. He leads them wandering frantically through the endless halls until Wax and Jed finally put their foot down. They completed their mission, made it to the bottom of the stairs. Wandering out endlessly with no plan and limited resources is a death sentence. Holloway, however, cannot be convinced, and so Jed and Wax are forced to leave him behind as they make the trek back up the stairs without him.
As they continue their ascent, they find the rest of their caches are also in various states of missing, ripped apart, or scattered. Already overstayed and missing most of their expected return supplies, things are beginning to look dire. And even more oddly, the things they're carrying with them begin falling apart. Shoelaces rip, buttons fall off, even the integrity of their packs begins to dissipate like dry rot, as if when things are left here for too long, they fall apart or are eaten by the house itself. As Wax says,
like you stop thinking about something and it vanishes. You forget you have pocket zippers and pow, they're gone.
Their return ascent is interrupted when Wax falls to the ground, struck in the shoulder by a bullet.
Holloway emerges from one of the many passageways that branch off from the staircase, confused.
How the hell did I get here? I thought it was that thing. Fuck, it was that thing.
Instead of helping his friends, however, Holloway seems frozen in a panic.
I can't go back now. I just shot someone. I'll go to jail. I'll lose everything. I have to think.
Jed patches up Wax as best he can and tries reasoning with Holloway.
It was an accident. You're not gonna go to jail. But if you sit there and let Wax die, for that they'll lock you up for life.
But Holloway is unconvinced, and he disappears back into the halls of the house. Jed and Wax are alone again, Wax gravely injured, and Holloway, still armed, has clearly lost his mind. Jed attempts to help Wax continue their way upward and out, but they are not left undisturbed for long. Shots ring out from the passageways. Holloway has officially lost it and is seemingly on the hunt for them now. The two other explorers are forced to duck inside one of the branching passageways deep into the house, into a room that is, for now, far away from Holloway and his rifle. Though now they are utterly lost from the stairs.
Afraid, with his friend losing blood next to him, Jed begins tapping the floor, the SOS message heard by the others back at home base. As they await their death or rescue, Wax tries to put on a happy face for Jed, but he's clearly beginning to feel the effects of the shock and blood loss.
And it's hard to keep the mood up when they begin hearing screams. Animalistic, howling wails of Holloway stomping around in the distance.
Zampanò has some interesting insights about this point of the film as well, comparing the situation to various stories of maritime mutiny, with emphasis on the particular dangers of their journey.
Freezing conditions, treacherous currents, frozen oceans, and the darkness of the tumultuous, murky waters. Many, if not all, of these situations end in the mutineers being executed or the captains killed or stranded somewhere. This context does, I think, help give us a view into Holloway's state of mind. In his paranoia, he believes that Wax and Jed turning back is a mutiny against him, and like those sailors on the high seas, believes his only options are either kill or be killed.
After this, Zampanò goes on for a bit to once again discuss the veracity of the film, how its presentation as a true documentary, similar to the Blair Witch Project, and lack of polish in many areas, draws us into its authenticity. But that form of authenticity can be manufactured, and he points out the truest proof of its reality is the money trail. There's no paper trail or production company, no tax returns that could explain the amount of money needed to produce such a film without anyone ever hearing about it. Either someone had a sophisticated money laundering scheme, or it's all true. At the time this was written, true consumer digital manipulation was only just beginning, and Zampanò's predictions as to where our ability to fake photo and video, the end of an information age where you could, in some capacity, trust the things you saw with your eyes, was ending. In the year 2026, for me, this more academic aside is perhaps one of the more horrific parts of this entire thing. But again, the point here seems to be that Zampanò is asking us not to trust a narrative blindly just because it seems that it could be true.
The final shot we see of Wax and Jed from their own perspective is the two young men sitting silently on the floor, the growl becoming louder, closing in, and something is now banging violently on the door. As Zampanò writes,
"Something is on the other side, hammering against it, over and over again. Whatever comes for those who are never seen again has come from him."
Johnny actually notes that this is probably a typo, and that it should read "come for him." But I wouldn't agree. As we've investigated the nature of the house, it seems more and more apparent that the house sort of reflects those inside it, that it can function as both an external building, but also the internals of the mind. In that way, whatever is out there is also coming from him. Speaking of Johnny
has a footnote here telling a story about his time in boarding school. A fantasy he had of some beautiful blonde girl he'd fall in love with, which felt so distant from him because he could never imagine someone actually loving him back in that way. But one day, he overhears a girl in the cafeteria say that she likes him, but he's never able to figure out who actually said it. He describes this event like seeing a ghost, the sound of a person he never saw, a passing apparition. In the present, Johnny meets up with this mysterious Ashley woman who had called him, but before he can ask where they know each other, she wordlessly hooks up with him and sends him on his way. He writes about this encounter with Ashley in a way that he only does with a few other women, like Thumper, some connection he feels that goes deeper than just the physical. Just before he leaves, he's able to ask her about what's going on, and she tells a long story about how they met in Texas and kissed but never went further, and she wanted to be with him one last time before she gets married. It is at this point Johnny tells her he's never been to Texas. He leaves dejected and distraught. Ashley mirrors this blonde ghost, this realization of a fantasy of finding a real connection with someone he loves, this weightless thing drenched in sunlight, which is once again ripped away from him from his perspective. Another ghost. Later, in yet another one-night stand with a woman named Haley, he awakens to find she's left without a word, despite things seemingly have gone well the night before, which is explained when he hears her call into an advice radio show later, where she says she was scared off by him screaming horrific things in his sleep. This seems to push him over the edge, upon realizing all of these hookups and substances aren't curing him of his fear, but just cramming it down until it explodes in the night. And he also genuinely feels bad for scaring Haley off. He really liked her.
He begins buying more locks for his doors, falling entirely into the fear of the house, and in the following cascade of paranoid prose, he apologizes to Haley and mentions how the buttons on his coat are going missing. Just like Wax and Jed, it's Johnny's turn to be devoured by the house. Interestingly, in the most complete edition of House of Leaves, the editors actually include emails and letters from readers of the previous versions, and apparently, Haley wrote in upon reading this part of the book.
I think Johnny was a little off here. We actually had a pretty rad time. He was very sweet and really gentle and kind of crude, but we still had a lot of fun. I was sorry to hear he disappeared. Do you know what happened to him?
I think this is important to include because it's once again very telling of the type of person Johnny really is. Though on first impression he seems to be a nihilistic ruffian, having seemingly internalized in some way this idea of being a beast, he is mostly just an incredibly traumatized, maladapted young man who wants to be kind and thoughtful and make connections with other people.
Back to the rescue team, Tom, Billy Reston, and Navidson make their way to the stairs without much difficulty, but by the time they arrive, Tom is pale and sweating.
Navy, I can't go down there. What's that supposed to mean? You're just giving up on them? Fortunately, by barely touching his friend's arm, Billy Reston forces Navidson to take a good hard look at his brother, clearly in no condition to go any further, let alone tackle the profound depths of that staircase. Sorry, Tom. I didn't mean to snap at you like that.
The plan, then, initially changes so that Reston and Tom make camp at the top of the stairs, and Navidson goes it alone, much to Reston's dismay.
I should sue the bastards who designed this house. Haven't they heard of handicap ramps?
However, Navidson reaches the bottom of the stairs after only 5 minutes. The stairwell has shrunk. Upon this discovery, the plan changes again, and Reston crawls down the stairs, Navidson carrying his wheelchair behind him, so that the two can set out together. Though there's definite relief that they won't have to go it alone or go down all those miles of stairs, it's only a temporary salve, as Reston is overwhelmed with nausea, some other strange effect on the inner ear from this place, and more uncanny thoughts overtake their minds. If it can shrink, it can expand again, trapping them at the bottom.
One has to wonder why the stairs changed for Navidson and Reston, and Zampanò analyzes this question as well, furthering the idea that the house reflects those inside it. For Holloway and crew, they were expecting a long, arduous journey, and that's exactly what they got. Navidson and Reston, full of adrenaline, with no first-hand conception of the actual length of the stairs, along with a true goal in mind to be found at the bottom, find themselves at the bottom in mere minutes. Similarly, this may be why Holloway seems so sure he's been seeing some monstrous thing no one else has. The house outputs what we input. It has come from him.
As Navidson and Billy Reston head out into the unknown in search of Jed, Wax, and Holloway, in the dark about what has happened to them in the time since their trek began, Tom sets up camp at the top of the stairs, with a tent, radio relay, and some supplies. We haven't given much time to consider Tom and his role in this story as of yet, so now seems as good a time as any.
As mentioned earlier, during their childhood, Tom and Will were inseparable, almost by necessity. They were each other's only support system, but in adulthood, their parental trauma set them in very different paths. Will chasing ambition, while Tom turned to apathy and eventually alcoholism. Though this was the beginning of their estrangement, when Will started his own family, he could no longer be that parental support system in Tom's life. While Will chased reckless independence, Tom struggled with that lack of support. However, by the time Tom and Will meet again earlier in the film, Tom is sober and holding a somewhat steady job.
Interestingly, Zampanò's writing on this subject is barely salvageable, pages ripped apart and covered in what is seemingly his own blood-stained handprints. The author is, just as everyone else in this mess, a mysterious man, but it's very poetic that the writings about two blood-related brothers' broken relationship is told through ripped pages stained in red. Tom records many video diary entries, mostly in darkness, over what turns out to be the days that Reston and Navidson are out on their rescue mission, making shadow puppets, telling jokes, and talking to Karen, and one recurring character, Mr. Monster. Alone and terrified in the dark halls, the oppressive feeling of being watched, of being attacked at any moment, like the one shared by Johnny Truant, I might add, Tom personifies this presence he feels by speaking to it.
Okay, Mr. Monster. I know you're there, and you're planning to eat me, and there's nothing I can do about that. But I should warn you, I've lived for years on fast food, greasy fries, more than a few polyurethane shakes. I smoke a lot of weed, too. Got a pair of lungs blacker than road tar. My point being, Mr. Monster, I don't taste so good.
Of note, in one particular entry, he creates a shadow puppet of Mr. Monster, which he defeats by turning off the light.
Just when Mr. Monster thinks he's gonna turn Tom the Hefty into Tom the Short Rib, Tom unleashes his secret weapon. Aha, Mr. Monster. Bye-bye, baby.
Again, the monster inside the house is a projection, an illusion, a creature made from the darkness itself. And when the light disappears, what's left isn't the absence of a shadow, it's an encompassment of it. The darkness of the house itself. That said, despite shivering in cold and fear, vomiting, seemingly taking the experience of entering the house harder than anyone else, he never loses his charming or humorous personality. He claims multiple times that he's just about to get up and turn back, but he never does. Despite his terror, he cannot abandon his brother.
For Karen, we hear her radio in to Tom a few times throughout these entries, and she reminds us all that the darkness of the hallway isn't the only place where the house's effects exist. All of her feng shui decorations have disappeared without a trace. When Navidson returns from this mission, she tells Tom she's leaving with the kids back to New York, with or without Navidson. It's all been too much and could have been completely avoided.
Briefly checking in on Johnny as his state has worsened, he actually gets himself to a doctor who prescribes him medication. The prospect of taking it, however, is much more terrifying to him than the darkness he's been gripped with.
I know what it means to go mad. I'll die before I go there.
Clearly, the traumatic memories of his mother and the Whalestoe Institute puts him at odds with the idea. Instead, he takes a perhaps drastic approach, destroying all of the substances in his household, from the medication to hundreds of dollars worth of drugs and alcohol, in hopes that finally clearing his mind will bring him clarity, that perhaps this is all a combination of too many chemicals clouding his brain. Later, Johnny details a bunch of stories from he and Lude's wild, ecstasy-fueled November. Johnny's tales of party and adventure turn dark as he continues, but the anecdote probably most of note here is the story of his Pekingese. Out at a bar, Lude points Johnny in the direction of a star he's vaguely acquainted with. They end up talking and leaving the club together, and on the way to her car, they find an abandoned stray Pekingese dog. Johnny's entire plan for the night shifts right then and there. He immediately feels protective of the animal. However, the woman insists she should be the one to take it. After all, she has a bigger house and a yard, and Johnny's stuck in a studio apartment. Despite beginning to feel something is slightly off about this woman, Johnny agrees and she rides off with the dog alone. And only moments after she rounds the corner, Johnny hears a thud. Filled with dread, Johnny follows the sound to find she has tossed the dog out of the car with an almost impossible amount of force. It's dead, and the woman is gone. Later, Loup tells him that he had actually mistaken that woman for someone else, and he has no idea who that was.
In much the same way Johnny was drawn to Zampano's manuscript because he relates to the forgotten and downtrodden, it's clear something similar happened with his connection to this dog. And if we view the Pekingese as a reflection of Johnny, it does not bode well as foreshadowing. Further, I think we can't undervalue this as just another continuation of Johnny's unfortunately traumatic life story. A deeply caring person who has been met with unending and seemingly pointless trauma. People he loves or loved him ripped away. Why would this woman do such a horrific thing after arguing Johnny out of just taking it home himself? It doesn't make sense. It's random. And the way he writes about this initial conversation with this woman reinforces this too. Lude suggests Johnny open the conversation with something pretty fucked up, to be honest, but Johnny tries to actually make real small talk about her interests and personality. This may be a little shallow, but you can't help but feel he might be out of place in this specific LA scene. And though he does often, and I mean a lot, write in graphic detail about these women's bodies, he often focuses just as much on a sense of longing, connection, parts of these encounters that go much deeper, and when they go their separate ways, he seems to feel a real sense of loss. He's looking for something much deeper in these encounters, but they almost always end just as shallowly as he began them.
Shifting back to the film, after nearly 3 days of exploring, Navidson and Billy Reston follow the sound of a whimper to a locked door, which they bust down to find Jed and Wax, alone and afraid. Jed looks up in amazement at the sight of his rescue when a bullet cracks through the air, and in the space of 2 frames, we see Jed's head pierced by that bullet, and his body slumped to the ground. Navidson ducks and tries to drag Jed and Wax's bodies out of harm's way behind a wall. Billy returns fire in the direction of the shot with a handgun. Navidson remarks,
"Since when did you bring a gun?"
To which Reston responds,
"Are you kidding me? This place is scary."
Shots continue to rattle out, but their flashlights aren't bright enough to illuminate the source, so Navidson retrieves a much stronger strobe light for photography. And we see, through flashes of light, Holloway, far down a hallway of open door frames, reloading his rifle, raising it to fire, and then the doors suddenly, inexplicably, begin slamming shut behind him. Finally, in front of him, a wave of shuddering hallways. It's enough to, for now, protect them behind layers of door.
Jed is as good. We're gonna have to wait for my light to charge up again. Jed is as good as dead, shuddering his last few breaths on the cold floor, but Wax is miraculously still alive, though that could change at any moment. He's been bleeding and freezing down here for who knows how long.
Navidson and Billy use the tent they brought to create a makeshift stretcher, and they begin making their way back to the stairs, bringing Wax and Jed's bodies with them, radioing Tom to meet them at the bottom.
Tom tries multiple times to make himself go down those stairs, and when he finally does manage to make it down a flight, the stairs seem to shift, and that overwhelming growl, more like a roar, washes over him. He turns back and tells Karen he's going back to the living room.
When Navidson, Billy, and the 2 explorers arrive at the bottom of the stairs to find Tom is nowhere to be seen, Navidson remarks,
"I shouldn't be surprised. This is Tom. This is what Tom does best. He lets you down."
Navidson, the smug son of a bitch he is almost immediately proven wrong when Tom, from the top of the stairs, lowers a rope. With the assistance of Karen, Tom has constructed a pulley system at the top of the stairs, which, all in all, is a much better plan than Navidson could have dreamed of. They successfully haul Wax and Jed's bodies up the stairs, dropping a coin down whenever they successfully retrieve each person.
While Navidson, working the rope at the bottom, and Tom at the top, are about halfway through pulling Reston and his wheelchair up, the rope begins to slip from Navidson's hands, and Billy is seemingly hauled upward by some invisible force, which increases faster and faster until Navidson's hands are burned so badly that he has to let go of the rope.
The stairway has stretched once again. Tom manages to haul Billy to the top, but Navidson is stuck below, an unknown distance above him. And to make matters worse, the pulley was broken by the force of the stairway's growth.
Navidson waits an hour at the bottom of the staircase when he hears a coin drop. Assuming the coin was dropped even as late as a few minutes after Billy was hauled up, that would still mean it was falling for almost an hour.
Interestingly, Zampanò calculates the distance using this metric as tens of thousands of miles, an impossible amount. But from my research, the distance is definitely a lot shorter than that, probably less than 100 miles. And while the idea that it has stretched that distance may not be physically correct, it feels subjectively correct.
I doubt Navidson did those calculations in his head, and there's no way to know if it would keep growing or not. What Navidson faced ahead of him was an unknown, an impossible journey upward into a seemingly endless darkness. Oh, it works!
Yippee-ki-yay, yippee-ki-yo.
He decides to look for the backpacks he left behind after the Holloway encounter, hoping to salvage supplies. While Navidson hits both a metaphorical and literal rock bottom, Johnny finds himself in such a pit as well. He's losing time, he stops showing up to work for 3 weeks and finds he's been replaced. His boss, usually combative with him, just seems genuinely worried about his well-being.
At his apartment, Johnny's been more diligently sealing his doors and windows and affixing tape measures to his floor and walls to ensure his apartment isn't changing size. He doesn't do much except work on the manuscript and sleep, awakening in fits of pure terror. He fears he's finally lost to whatever this thing is, the monster, the house, the darkness that's been haunting him. However, a bit of clarity has come to him regarding Ashley. She didn't say they met in Texas. They met at Texas, as in T-E-X', at a party hosted by some rich guy named Tex. Johnny wasn't even 18 yet, and Ashley had invited him back to her place, but he felt there was something special between them. So he planned to wait and call her later and make this a real relationship. But between that time and now, he lost her to the maze of his memories. And in this spiral of prose, he begins telling another story, maybe even a true story, though not a literal one, about a ship called the Atrocity, carrying 2 pieces of cargo, something secret and something explosive, and in a freak accident, it catches fire and explodes, tearing the ship into pieces and killing everyone on board, except one man, trapped in an intact piece, a room with a fleeting air bubble sinking into the inky blackness.
Losing air, losing his sense of his home, his daughters, his 5 blonde daughters, and he feels the shelf of rock give way, and suddenly the ship rushes down again. No rock now, no earth, so black, and nothing to stop this final descent, except maybe the shelf of rock didn't give way. Maybe the ship hasn't moved at all. Maybe what he feels now is only his own fall as the air runs out and the cold closes in for good, and I've lost sight of him. I'm not even sure if he really had 5 blonde daughters. I'm losing any sense of who he was. No name, no history, only the awful panic he felt, universal to us all, as he sunk inside that thing, down into the unyielding waters, until peace finally did follow panic. A sad and mournful peace, but somewhat pleasant after all, even though he lay there alone, chest heaving, yes, understanding home, understanding hope, and losing all of it, all long, long gone, a long, long time ago.
This story is obviously relevant to Johnny, his own sinking into darkness, feeling helpless, traumatized by a shipwreck he personally experienced in Alaska, which pulled a friend of his into the water, and losing that blonde lover which he may have started a family with if things turned out differently. And just as much as trees and books and hallways have been representative of the house, so too has the inky abyss, the abyss which Johnny now finds himself in, the oceanic one his friend from Alaska sunk into, damn it. And just as them, so too is Navidson, separated at the bottom of the house's inky abyss. And as long as we're making these connections, now that you mention it, Karen is blonde too. Speaking of Karen, the film continues by shifting perspectives to the aftermath of the living room. What happens when Tom and Billy return with Jed and Wax, and without Navidson. And I think it's worth starting with some pieces outside the film itself, as Zampanò does in this section, using interviews from Chad and Daisy's teacher to give more context to the bloody scene the film returns to.
According to interviews and Zampanò's writing, Miss Brooks was a bit concerned when the children missed school, the reason being that Karen had pulled them out to pack for New York on the very day of the rescue team's return, so Brooks pays them a little visit.
To tell you the truth, I almost drove off, but since I'd made the drive, I decided I should at least introduce myself.
She arrived just in time to witness the chaotic aftermath of the team's return. Billy is contacting the police. Tom and Karen share tears over the loss of Navidson to the staircase. Wax's pale, shallow-breathing body lies on the kitchen floor next to Jed. Blood covers the floor, seeping into carpet and tile. With the house in such a frenzy, nobody stops Daisy and Chad as they approach the two blood-covered bodies. In what is an almost tender moment amidst the frenzy, they end up drip-feeding Wax water.
Brooks obviously leaves, replaced by police and ambulances. Wax is taken to the hospital, as are Jed's remains. Though not shown in the film itself, Zampanò's research seems to tell him Wax made a near-full recovery and went on to live a relatively regular life. Police are shown the footage the team was able to return with of Holloway shooting Jed, and a manhunt begins that lasts years. Though Karen tries to explain to the sheriff that Holloway and Navidson are both still inside the house down this dark hallway. After only a few moments inside, the sheriff left and never returned to the house. In the following days, Tom relapses into drinking. Reston obsessively tries to reach Navidson over the radio, and the children disappear into their yard and their rooms. The house, too, seems to have retreated. Tom and Reston find the hallway is compressed to only a few feet deep now. Wherever Navidson is, they can't go in after him. For Karen's part, she's just spent the last week at the home base in horrified, rapt attention as to Navidson's safety, and with seemingly no hope of his return, she refocuses entirely to her children and prepares for them to leave.
The security-style cameras show us the night of the 4th day since Navidson disappeared down the stairs. As Zampanò points out, Karen had spent her entire relationship paradoxically pushing Navidson away and hopelessly dependent on him. And in a way, her finally really losing him has seemingly broken that dependence. Now, in the dark, the quiet, there's almost a sense of peace. And then, Navidson appears from the hallway, limping and exhausted. He wakes Karen, and in the following flurry of words and emotion, everyone else awakens too. Still, Karen holds fast to her commitment. One of the first things she tells him is that she's leaving for New York right away.
Navidson describes his return after the fact, finding Jed's pack and later Holloway's, along with the camera, ammo, and rifle, but Holloway is nowhere to be found. As Navidson continued his ascent, the growling increased, as did the pain in his feet from which he suffers a lifelong chronic fungal infection, and the exhaustion, and his mind turned to Delisle. Though, again, we still don't really know who that is. But then, it turned to his family, his memories of them. He fell into a daze, remembering his children, remembering Karen, and after a long while, he just found himself at the top. There's plenty of theories as to how he made it out the way he did. Perhaps his losing track of time shortened the distance, his experience of the house transforming it physically. But I think it's pretty clear the thought of the people he cared about most is what returned him from that spiral abyss. Before leaving, the remaining inhabitants of the house gather to watch the tapes Navidson retrieved from Holloway's body. Zampanò also chimes in at this point to give us some outside context as to Holloway's history and mental health beforehand.
Holloway had a history of intense depression and suicidal ideation, immense feelings of inadequacy likely stemming from his childhood. Zampanò notes that this is a distinct similarity Navidson and Holloway share, both reportedly having dealt with these same feelings. Ultimately, though, Navidson channeled his into art, while Holloway, in the end, channeled it into violence. And one can't help but connect this thread through Johnny as well, his mental health taking a dive, and his past with channeling his trauma into violence too. The footage Holloway left behind is brief and manic, apologies and immense guilt, while also muttering plans about finishing Jed and Wax off, and returning saying they've been lost. His paranoia and overwhelming fear eventually overcome him as he stumbles aimlessly through the hallways, muttering his own name and facts about himself, just Just as the house devours clothes and supplies if left unused or forgotten too long, here too the house begins devouring Holloway. And still, he seems convinced of some monster coming after him. One must draw comparisons to how different individuals interact with the house. As Zampanò points out, Tom meets it with humor, and Navidson with thoughts of his loved ones. Holloway, on the other hand, approaches the house as something to conquer, something to kill, and so he remains lost.
In the end, Holloway slumps to the ground, oscillating between screaming and whispering, before finally taking his rifle and shooting himself in the chest. He dies over the next several minutes of footage, and then the house roars, and the light of his flare is swallowed by darkness. And when Navidson finds his things, his body is nowhere to be found.
Zampanò does spend a little bit of time here once again dissecting the mythology of the Minotaur as it relates to the house and Holloway, but it is yet again crossed out, and I can't help but think that signifies something.
That there is no beast inside the house. Analysis that entertains the idea that Mr. Monster is anything other than the house itself, isn't a figment of your mind, a shadow in the maze of shadows, misses what's truly there. And with Holloway, the truest believer in that monster, now dead, and still no monster in sight, seems clearer than ever. He chased that Minotaur with intent to shoot to kill, and if the house truly is an impression of the self, he succeeded, turning the barrel on the source of the monster he saw in the reflection of that opaque mirror. The creature stalking the maze with murderous intent, the Minotaur, was Holloway.
Zampanò's writing during this section is unfortunately incomplete, as Johnny notes. Something has burned many of these pages, leaving some of it nothing but ash. On the note of Ash Tree Lane and fire, Lude actually came to visit Johnny, to warn him that Kyrie's boyfriend, the Gdansk man, is looking for him. Seeing the state he was in, though, Lude gives Johnny a lighter and suggests he just burn the entire manuscript. Clearly, it's taking a toll. Johnny does consider this, but in the end holds out for now.
He decides his course of action should be finishing the book, hoping that once it's all together complete, it will become just a book. And if that doesn't work,
well, perhaps taking a similar out as Holloway. He even bought a gun.
In a similar connection between the two, Johnny also discusses how he ended up escaping Raymond by turning his anger into fear, finding it much more productive to be afraid of him than turning his anger to violence. It let him bide his time until he could escape to Alaska. Moving back to the film, everyone is preparing to leave. Tom and Will get a moment together, Tom emotionally unpacking his grief and subsequent relief at Navidson's return. He builds extra barricades on the door and gives Karen the only keys. It seems, finally, they're going to be able to leave this house behind.
Shuddering, thundering knocking overwhelms the door from the other side of the hallway. The barricade begins falling apart, and suddenly, the entire house bursts to life, the walls and ceilings and floor transforming to that ashen color as the rooms begin to expand and shrink and shift. Navidson is able to get out with Karen, but she's knocked unconscious by a shrinking doorframe, which also injures Navidson's shoulder. As for Billy Reston, the floors begin to tilt downward into a ramp that ends in a pit of nothingness. He's able to get out of his wheelchair and grab onto something, but even his admittedly strong grip is waning. Navidson is able to run back inside and help drag Billy out of the house, but Tom, Chad, and Daisy are still missing. Chad is found relatively quickly, having been safely outside when things began, but Daisy's screams echo through the house. Navidson appears outside the kitchen window to see that Tom has Daisy, but the rest of the house is too treacherous to get out the front door. Tom is able to hand Daisy to Navidson through the kitchen window, but the floor beneath Tom begins to move like a treadmill, forcing Tom to run at full sprint to stay in place. Navidson reaches out for him, but Tom is entirely exhausted from the effort of getting Daisy through that window. And within a few mere moments, in the space of a frame, the floor beneath Tom's feet simply disappears. And so does he, into an abyss with no end. Navidson screams, he cries, Tom is gone.
Many have speculated what changed the house from mostly passive threat to an animate one, or what reason there was that everyone but Tom survived that encounter. Some have posited that Tom's relapse after Navidson's disappearance put him at a weaker point, while the others, like Karen or Navidson, had just recently overcome some of their struggles. But I find the idea that an alcoholic momentarily relapsing after the death of their closest family to mean that they're a lost cause to be unconvincing, especially as we'll see later in the film, because Navidson and Karen have not really overcome their struggles yet either. In my view, Tom was an unfortunate casualty to Holloway's effect on the house, just as Jed was. You are what you eat, you could say. Holloway's dying moments were filled with the motivation to kill the others, kill the monster, as Billy Reston even says himself in an interview after the fact.
My first thought was that it was Holloway, though that hammering was awful hard. I'm thinking, if that is Holloway, he's changed, and I don't need to reacquaint myself with this new and improved version.
There's also a parallel to this moment which we can find in Johnny's story too, which seems narratively relevant to Tom's death, but we'll get there when we get there. Speaking of, Johnny has gotten word that the Gdansk man is on an absolute rampage, trying to go after Lude first and now turning his attention to Johnny in full.
Johnny then gets a call from Thumper. She invites him over, says she'll make him dinner, is the kind of thing that a month ago would have made Johnny burst through the door like the Kool-Aid Man. But at this point, even that can't pull him out. And seeing things a little clearer now, he realizes he doesn't really know her, doesn't even know her real name. Just as he's about to ask her, see if he can make a connection deeper than a fantasy, see if she can mean something to him. His phone goes out. The company canceled his line. The last of the utilities to go, too. His power and gas were already shut off, and his door is covered in eviction notices.
Upon escaping the house, Karen takes the kids to New York as promised, while Navidson stays in Virginia to attend to his brother's things, crashing with Billy Reston and promising to join them in New York as soon as he's done. But months pass, and he's yet to return, and Karen begins to wonder if he ever will. He's even stopped returning phone calls by now. He has been, however, shipping Karen the tapes and film reels that they gathered over the months spent at the house, and Karen begins looking through them and editing them together. Zampanò touches some more on Karen Green's history and her relationship with Navidson at this point, which I think seems really relevant to the next portion of the film. According to those that knew her, the decision for Navidson and Karen not to get married was entirely Karen's call.
Navy would have married her in a second. She wanted her freedom, and then would go berserk when he was away.
Though she clearly made some breakthroughs in letting go of Navidson, her complicated relationship with him was not so easily cleared up in 1 week of terror, and she finds herself in a strange space while alone in New York.
Karen meets up with one of her old affairs, a guy named Fowler, and he describes her in a tabloid interview as having completely changed since they last met.
It was fun and all, but she looked like hell. She'd changed over the months, pale, darker, didn't smile much, and when she did, it was kind of different than before, kind of quirky, weird, real personal.
Despite being included in his description that she looks worse off than before, this change in her smile most definitely feels like a breakthrough in a way. The manufactured smile she practiced as a teenager returning to an authentic one, maybe. And on that note, Zampanò reveals more of what Karen's sister has said publicly about their childhood, though it's worth noting her account can't entirely be trusted, as she seems to have some level of spite for Karen. According to her, as children, they were both assaulted by their stepfather, making the other one wait at the bottom of a well. Karen has, of course, never corroborated these claims, but it seems a horrific and understandable explanation for her claustrophobia. It makes it especially clear why the darkened halls of the house were such a horrific environment to be trapped in for Karen over the previous months. Crudely but accurately exemplified by Billy Reston's assertion that the phenomenon was goddamn spatial rape. Again, for each person, the house means something different, but it is always very personal. In any case, by all accounts, now in New York, she is in the trenches working through this trauma. And this process of editing the film together and seeing her life and everybody in it from this external perspective seems to be the main form this takes in her deconstructions. It is around this time that snippets of the film, like the 5.5-minute hallway, began circulating first. Karen sharing her rough versions of the film with artists, friends, directors, and the like. And in this portion of the film, Karen's own subsection, labeled What Some Have Thought, relays the reactions and thoughts of the various people she's shown the film to. Under the guise it is fiction. Though there's a lot to sift through here, these are perhaps the two most compelling bits. First, that the only ones who seem to suspect this film might not actually be fiction, that this has all really happened, are in fact horror authors and filmmakers, the people who do this stuff for a living.
You didn't make this up, did you? I'd like to see this house. If I didn't know better, I'd say you weren't a filmmaker at all. I'd say this whole thing really happened.
And secondly, while many of the acclaimed artists she shows the film to all have their own opinions as to the core theme or meaning, it is perhaps Karen's therapist whose insight is most important.
More importantly, Karen, what does it mean to you?
This part of the film concludes in a vignette created entirely by Karen, a brief history of who I love, seemingly a culmination of her deconstruction of Navidson and her family as a reflection of herself, and a reconstruction into seeing the person that he actually is. It is simple but effective, a slideshow of sorts of photographs of Navidson throughout his life, growing up with Tom, his time in Vietnam, his photojournalism career of the war-torn and decimated, and then it holds on a specific photograph of Navidson taken by someone else during his time in Vietnam, head in his hands, weeping about something we'll never know, before transitioning to much more recent footage of him playing in the snow with their children. In all, as Zampanò writes, it paints a portrait of a man who despises the destruction and pain in this world, and tries with his entire soul to preserve the beauty and people which exist here too. And perhaps the greatest revelation discovered by Karen and shared in this vignette is found in a single photograph. A photo Navidson took of a starving little girl, a vulture not far off in the background, which Navidson has marked Delisle. The mystery that has been haunting Karen is finally solved, the name he speaks in his sleep belonging to a victim of the many horrors which he spent his life photographing, one that seems to have weighed especially heavy on him. Karen's acceptance of Navidson's death at the house 4 months earlier allowed her to dismantle her codependence on him, her reliance. But this piece, A History of Who I Love, has allowed her to deconstruct the simultaneous distance she put between them and recognize that she does, in the end, still love him. And she realizes she's going to have to go find him. Despite the advice of those around her, she's going back to Virginia. So, what has Navidson been getting up to in Virginia all this time? Well, after attending to his brother's things, he and Billy Reston began working with someone at the university to test samples of the house's materials taken by Holloway and crew.
Though there isn't much in the way of answers to be found here, it does reveal that that ashen surface was a combination of various different minerals which range in age from a few hundred years old to interstellar, older than the Earth, even older than our solar system.
Upon hitting a dead end on this front, Reston calls it quits. It's time to bring National Geographic in or something, the experts. Unlike Navidson, Billy has retained no such obsession with the house or any relationship with it. As he's quoted,
I enjoy my life at the university. My colleagues, my friends there, the woman I've started to see. I've no desire to court death.
If you ask me, this speaks to Billy Reston having already overcome a deeper trauma from earlier in his life. Those drawn into the house, whether Johnny or Navidson or Holloway or Karen, have these unresolved wounds which the house reflects back at them. Billy seems to have, for the most part, put those demons to bed years ago. He has no reason to relitigate them within the walls of that place. Though Navidson initially agrees to leave the house be and call in the experts, Billy finds that he's disappeared the very next morning, leaving only a thank you note for Billy and a letter for Karen. When Billy drives to the house, he unsurprisingly finds Navidson's car is parked outside.
After mustering the courage to enter the house again, Billy finds that it's returned, seemingly, to normal. And not just like it was before their escape, the hallway in the living room has been completely replaced with a simple, shallow closet. Zampanò spends a great deal of time discussing academic theories as to why Navidson decided to return to the house, but in my opinion, The most obvious one is that the house continues to act as a manifestation of his unresolved trauma. The drunken letter Navidson leaves for Karen apologizes profusely and understands that this is ultimately a stupid idea, but he feels that he has to return because of Delisle.
I can't get Delisle out of my head. Not the photo, that thing, but who she was before 1/60th of a second sliced her out of thin air and won me the Pulitzer, though that didn't keep the vultures away. I did that by swinging my tripod around, though that didn't keep her from dying. 5 years old, Daisy's age. Doesn't matter if she was already 10 minutes from dying. I took 3 minutes to snap a photo. I wish I were dead right now. I wish I were dead. That poor little baby, this god-awful world. I miss the man I thought I was before I met her. The man who would have saved her, who would have been Tom. Maybe he's the one I'm looking for. I miss you. I love you. There's no second I've lived you can't call your own.
For Navidson, this return to the house is almost a punishment. He was unable to save Delisle. She died instead of him, and later, Tom is the one who saved his own daughter, and now Tom is dead too. He couldn't be Delisle's Tom, but he also got out alive in both situations while others died. But additionally, Navidson seems to finally come to the conclusion that the house is not some standalone anomaly. He understands the personal significance it has.
I need to go back to that place one more time. I'm starting to see that place for what it is, and it's not for cable shows or National Geographic.
What's especially interesting is how, in their time away from each other, both Karen and Navidson interrogate the house in some way. While Karen's are more personal explorations through the film end up leading her to a more cathartic place, Navidson's attempts to literally scientifically understand it at the university only further his obsession. The solution to overcoming the house is internal, not by physically figuring it out. And one can see this with Johnny as well. He's putting all his focus into completing the physical manuscript as some solution rather than deconstructing his own personal problems. And this has led him to the much darker place he is in now. The final thing Navidson leaves behind before returning to the house are a series of video entries recalling 3 different dreams he's had, leading up to his final return.
Unfortunately, our only accessible record of these dreams comes from Zampano's description, which is missing the description of his 3rd dream, so we'll just have to make do with the first 2. In the first, he is in a large concrete room, at the center of which is a well. Water extends into a bottomless pit from this well, and every once in a while, some of the other inhabitants of this room will jump inside. For some, they are disappeared in a brilliant beam of light, while others become stuck in the water, sinking eternally in agony. Navidson seems to understand that he is in purgatory, and that he can stay here as long as he likes. If he's lived a good life, when he enters the water, he will be transported to some equivalent to heaven. But if you have lived a bad life, you will sink into that darkness for eternity. Navidson ponders which kind of life he's lived before waking up.
Clearly, this dream is influenced by his experiences within the house, but more than that, it's a reflection of his current struggle with his own morality and guilt, and how his return to the house will be his own diving into the well to see what happens when he hits the water.
The second dream is a little stranger. He's a member of a village which has been blessed with an enormous snail, big enough to feed them for decades. One night, the villagers all enter the snail's shell to give it thanks, but when everyone else leaves, Navidson continues walking. The spiral of the shell slowly getting smaller and darker, his candlelight growing dimmer. He ponders whether to turn back or keep going, imagining that the sunlight will illuminate the shell in the morning, bathing everything in a beautiful, ethereal glow. The spiral and cramped journey forward is, again, definitely representative of the stairs and his coming exploration, but it seems to have a much more positive connotation here. Like there's something beautiful to be found on the other side of that darkness.
Though we don't have any record of Navidson's 3rd dream, we may be able to find a somewhat analogous story in Johnny's footnotes that seems to complete the trifecta. So let's take another look at how he's doing. Johnny is aware that, to some extent, he is likely suffering from the same condition his mother did. Probably schizophrenia, though it's never specified. Still, he continues to accumulate guns, actually purchasing the very same models that Holloway and Billy Reston carried. Also worth noting, Johnny reveals that despite the letter his mother sent him about trying to strangle him as a child, he doesn't actually remember those events.
Later, Later, Johnny runs into Kyrie again at the store. Though she is clearly off-put by his disheveled appearance, she asks if he wants to go for another ride. When he declines, she becomes upset and storms off. And now, to the dream. In this footnote, Johnny describes a dream where he is the Minotaur, within a maze inside the belly of some seafaring vessel similar to the atrocity from his previous writing. Theseus, who appears as a drunken frat boy wielding an axe and a garbage can lid, is coming for him. Johnny knows that Raymond is the one who put him here, his very own King Minos. The way Johnny describes his own appearance as the Minotaur, scarred skin and sharp teeth, all seem directly related to his appearance in real life, the things he feels self-conscious about or represent some trauma. Before he can kill this fuckboy Theseus, the man's face morphs, changes to the various different women from his life, Kyrie, Ashley, and finally settling on Thumper. He is stopped in his tracks as Thumper looks at him with an expression of understanding, of love, frozen in place by those warm, sunny feelings he's been searching for, overwhelming him even as Thumper brings the axe down, first to his shoulder, then to his head, killing him. Maybe unimportant, but those are the same places Navidson and Karen were struck while escaping the house.
On a basic level, it's easy to understand this dream as another instance of Johnny's identification with the Minotaur, a distorted view of himself informed by his past. He sees himself as a beast, incapable of being fully loved, a violent, scarred creature with his very own King Minos as a stepfather. But the vessel, just like the atrocity and the buildings of Navidson's dreams, represents the house, the architectural manifestation of an internal darkness, of the self. And at the center of that maze is not some external monster, you find yourself, and so he is his own Minotaur. While it also fits nicely as a continuation of Navidson's dreams, foreshadowing the internal journey that him yet again delving into that hallway represents, it is also very explicitly about Johnny's trauma, the maternal love and female comfort he had as a child with his mother that was shattered, torn away from him at a young age, and he is now seemingly searching for it in these other women. And that companionship, that comfort, was unfortunately turned on him in violence in his childhood. The boiling water, the strangling. And so in this dream, he finds himself yet again attacked by the faces of the women in his life from which he seeks that comfort. It is a very layered network of traumas and the subconscious which has manifested itself in this very odd dream.
Finally, Johnny leaves a footnote revealing that his next plan is to leave town and head for Virginia, looking for the house from the Navidson Record, or to find some kind of answers at least. He tries to tie things up in LA as best he can, leaving a note with his boss for Thumper and saying goodbye to Lude, who he finds in the hospital. Apparently, Kyrie told her fiancé, the Gdansk man, that Johnny and Lude had accosted her at the store, so he ambushed him one night, leaving Lude with genuinely life-threatening injuries. Still, Lude seems in good spirits, supposing he'll get a pretty good court settlement out of this. Johnny leaves Lude some money, loads his guns and clothes into a car, and heads for Virginia.
Karen returns to Virginia alone, Daisy and Chad being taken care of by family back in New York. She speaks with their realtor about selling the house, though the two women quickly bond about much more personal matters as well. After the realtor initially heard about the mysteriously appearing doorway all the way back when the family first returned from the trip to Seattle, she did a deep dive into the house's history, but found no strong evidence there was any kind of haunting. Zampanò, on the other hand, pulls up one obscure historical document that could possibly be related. Journal entries from a winter famine in the Jamestown colony in the early 1600s. A group of desperate hunters, lost and without hope of finding food, fearing the cold will take their lives at any moment.
Likewise, we must also believe, or else in the name of the Lord take charge of the knowledge that we are all dead men.
They even write about a peculiar quality to the sound of the wind, which brings to mind the growl of the house.
The storm will not break. Worm went out to hunt but returned within the hour. The wind makes a wicked sound in these woods.
But the final entry is short, simple, and oddly terrifying.
Stairs! We have found stairs!
There's no record of stairs being found by anyone else, but only 2 of the 3 men's bodies were ever recovered.
It seems to imply that those awful stairs found inside the house existed all the way back then, and had drawn at least one of these men into it. Karen initially entertains the idea of selling the house, even giving a showing of it, but eventually decides against it.
Instead, she moves her things back in and lives there for a while, alone. Billy Reston occasionally comes to visit. We see all of this via the still intact security-style cameras within the house, and here we can fully corroborate Fowler's assertion, if we're to believe Zampano's writing. Karen's smile is completely different, something that seems completely unself-conscious, an expression of true happiness. We watch as she laughs and cries, sometimes without a clear reason, but she reveals to Billy she sometimes hears his voice in the house. Navidson, coming from somewhere. Billy is unconvinced that he could still be alive after so much time, but Karen still spends her time calling out to him, listening to the floorboards and the walls.
And one afternoon, Karen enters the children's bedroom to find Navidson's things on the floor, appearing out of nowhere. His tapes and cameras and backpack. She calls Billy and sits down to watch the tapes. The view we see does not face the projector, however, instead just a blurry shot of Karen as she watches, the wall behind her in much sharper focus, which suddenly begins to transform into that ashen darkness, completely unbeknownst to her. We don't see what she sees on the tape at this point, but whatever it is causes her to sit up and turn around. Feels like it's getting cold in here.
We now shift to Navidson's perspective, his final exploration, Exploration 5. In the months leading up to his ultimate descent, he made damn well sure he would not be unprepared, both from a survival standpoint, but also a filmmaking one.
Aside from Exploration A, the only other time he's had the opportunity to actually explore that place, he was far too focused on a rescue mission to put his full attention on truly trying to document it.
He carries his equipment on a bicycle-mounted trailer, hauled behind the mountain bike he's brought with him to cover ground faster. Instead of heading straight for the stairs, Navidson takes his time wandering the halls as he shoots photo and video, and as he continues further in, he begins to notice that it's becoming easier and easier to pedal his bike until eventually he doesn't have to pedal at all. There seems to be a growing decline that pulls him in, moving faster and faster.
Realizing how quickly he's covering ground due to his helpful downhill and what kind of a journey it will be to pedal back up, he decides to start heading in the opposite direction. However, he soon realizes no matter which direction he pedals in, against all logic and physics, it is always downhill, and continues to get more steep.
Soon, he's zipping along at 30 miles an hour, covering hundreds of miles a day. Though he does find some small rooms to camp, at this point he's basically rolling down one endless corridor, which changes size and shape as he moves through it, narrowing, shrinking, then growing again. All these changes, of course, accompanied by that growl. Eventually, the walls and ceilings fall away completely, just a floor in the void, and his speed increases exponentially. He's probably traveled thousands of miles at this point.
Speeding through this void, Navidson becomes overwhelmed with the feeling that he is reaching an end, a cliff, that the floor is about to fall away. His brakes completely ineffective at this speed, he throws himself and the bike to the ground, injuring himself and damaging the trailer, but successfully stopping himself at the very edge
of a seemingly endless drop-off. Nearby, he notices a turret-type structure sticking out from the edge, and he clambers inside to camp for the night. Within this little room, he finds a staircase oddly extending not up or down, but sideways out from the turret. Leaving that be for now, he sleeps for the night, though who can tell if it really was night or day at this point. I should also note that Zampano's retelling of this scene in the book once again transforms into a beautiful tapestry of ergodic text, perfectly reflecting Navidson's spatial experience within the confines of these pages. Upon awakening, Navidson finds that the entire room, perhaps the entire house, has shifted again, more precisely, rotated. The stairs now extend upward, above him. Additionally, the door he used to enter this room has disappeared. He is left with only one way out. Up. Gathering only the supplies he's able to carry on his back, he scrambles up the stairs, and as soon as he makes it onto the first few steps, the floor and walls, and indeed everything else but that passageway up the stairs, falls away, disappears. There is truly no going back now. Like a lost scuba diver with waning oxygen, his only way out now
is through.
Navidson spends hours climbing these stairs until eventually, at the height of exhaustion, he makes it to the top, out into a small, narrow corridor. Gravity working with him for a change is a welcomed relief, his injured leg in excruciating pain. The corridor continues to narrow until he can only move forward by crawling on his belly. At the end of this corridor, there is a window. On the other side, true void. No ashen walls, no ashen ceiling, no ashen floors, and Navidson crosses through. Though he feels as though he's standing on something, there is nothing to be found but true darkness, pure absence. The rest of his lights out of battery, with little else to do, Navidson is forced to read by matchlight the single book he took with him, a book entitled House of Leaves.
Let's just hold our questions until it's over, alright?
With no other options, Navidson resorts to burning the pages with his remaining matches, ripping them out and setting them alight one by one, the last fuel to his last fire until the entire book, spine and all, go up in flames.
I have nothing left.
That invisible slab he was standing on is now gone. He has no idea what direction he's facing, no relevant spatial information to make any observations. Maybe he's floating, maybe he's falling, inhabiting pure nothing. This section of the film is devoid of any real footage, just the darkness and the sound of Navidson describing his situation, his narration devolving as he is slowly dying from exposure.
As Zampanò describes it, 6 minutes of darkness. The only other film I can think of pulling off the tension created from almost nothing but dark film grain would be ᴄᵒᵘⁿ, and some of the writing Zampanò includes really makes it feel that way.
The audience squirming in their seats, squinting at that implacable screen, now and then glancing over at those luminous red exit signs in order to give their eyes a rest, while somewhere behind them a projector continues to spew out darkness. There is still a haunting proximity when he speaks, as if he were no longer buried in black, his words tapering without echo.
Also very similar to the incredibly close whispering of ᴄᵒᵘⁿ's dialogue. Anyway.
As Navidson floats in the darkness, he says something that is perhaps the most profound understanding of the house itself, what all that darkness really is.
I have no sense of anything other than myself.
As his body is overwhelmed with the cold and nothingness, his thoughts and mutterings become less coherent. He cries and thinks about his loved ones, Tom, his children, most of all Karen. He tries to recall a song, sings the lyrics of the song Daisy Bell, but according to Zampanò's sheet music transcription, it's actually closer to the melody for the Civil War song When Johnny Comes Marching Home.
Which has like so many layers. You've got Johnny, who's right now out looking for a home, Navidson himself having marched through the house. Maybe we'll unpack that later. Anyway, just like his first return from the depths of the house, devoid of anything else, Navidson is left only with what he truly cares about most, the people he loves. Eventually, his muttering falls away into strained breathing, and then...
Light. Can't be. I see light. Care.
There are maybe half a dozen frames of a blue speck in the void before the tape runs out.
For the book's part, Johnny's footnotes take over almost completely at this point. As we're reaching the end of the Navidson record, so too is Johnny's story drawing to a close. These footnotes function as essentially diary entries.
Between the years 1998 and 1999, beginning, at first, in late October of 1998, around the time he wrote the foreword we read at the start. Last we heard from him, he was heading to Virginia, but he has no recollection of what happened during that time. And now we're months ahead. He's back in California, in any case, living in a seedy motel, having entirely lost his sense of reality, and fully internalizing that he is the monster that's been haunting him, the monster that haunts everyone.
I'm not afraid. Why should I be? What disturbs the sleep of everyone in this hotel, what crushes their throats in their dreams and stalks them like the dusk the day, is and has always been me.
He proceeds to find a series of Polaroids in his room, of places he doesn't remember being, specifically of houses, along with a journal that he wrote from his time in Virginia. And having forgotten what happened in those months, here he includes what occurred in that lost time according to this journal. From May to August of 1998, Johnny visits Virginia, traveling all over the state in search of some evidence of Navidson Reston of the house, but he finds none. He realizes then that this specific house was never truly meaningful to him. That was Zampanò's obsession, Zampanò's work. Instead, Johnny tries to return to the places that meant something to him, starting with the now abandoned Whalestoe Institute.
Decayed but still standing, Johnny stays the night in the room his mother lived in, hoping to feel her return to him like a ghost, but in the morning, he feels no different. He is just as enveloped in darkness as before.
Next, he goes to visit the house he grew up in before his father's death, but the entire neighborhood has been razed and replaced with a lumberyard. Returning to this place, though, he falls into the memories of what happened here, specifically the evening his arms were scarred, remembering his father's reaction.
Roared, really, but not a roar, when he beheld my burning arms, an ear-shattering, nearly inhumane shout.
This again sounds like it's paralleling the roar of the house, too. In almost a stupor, staring down at his own arms, Johnny is kicked out of the yard by the workers there.
I heard nothing. My ears had popped. My mind had gone blank. Utterly.
Throughout September, Johnny's story turns uncharacteristically optimistic. He writes about running into some friends of his in Seattle who are doctors. They take him in, help him recover. He's going to therapy, he's feeling better, and he's even being prescribed a new medication that has cured his nightmares.
I am much improved. My friends have been taking care of me full time. I exercise twice a day. They've got me on some pretty serious health food.
His entry on September 29th begins,
Are you fucking kidding me? Did you really think any of that was true? I just made all that up. I wasn't trying to trick you. I was trying to trick myself to believe, even for 2 lousy hours, that I really was lucky enough to have 2 such friends.
Through mid-October, Johnny moves back to LA, sells his car, and finds himself in that seedy motel. He tries to call Lude and gets no answer, but Thumper picks up when he calls her. She's happy to hear from him, offers him dinner to help him get himself cleaned up. The helping hand he dreamed of just last month. But the very next day, October 25th, Johnny learns that Lude is dead. A motorcycle accident, driving under the influence. After getting on painkillers during his recovery from the Gdansk man's attack, he fell into harder substances and eventually into addiction. Despite Johnny being given an almost impossibly well-timed offer to get back on his feet from Thumper, Lude's death completely breaks Johnny. And it's about here where we found him initially.
In that darkness, the monster overcoming him, memory gone. He leaves the motel and starts living on the street, which is where the Gdansk man finally finds him.
He pulls up with Kyrie and beats Johnny to the ground, walking off believing he's settled the score. Unfortunately, he picked a fight with the wrong guy. Johnny is overcome with an unimaginable rage, grabs a stray bottle from the ground and, well, with the following events, it's not entirely clear what's reality. But as Johnny tells it,
he smashes the Gdansk man over the head with the bottle and proceeds to beat him brutally with his bare hands. Kyrie tries to intervene, but Johnny just looks at her and screams, shocking her to stillness. And then, in a rambling, nightmarish bit of prose, he kills the Gdansk man, kidnaps Kyrie, and it only gets darker from there.
Surprised? Really? Has nothing prepared you for this? This place where no eye will find her, no ear will hear her, among pillars of rust, where hawks haunt the sky.
The same words he used to describe the place where Raymond took him, too.
I will become, I have become, a creature unstirred by history, no longer moved by the present, just hungry, blind, and at long last full of mindless wrath. Gdansk man dies, soon Kyrie will too.
To be totally honest, I doubt the events really played out the way he wrote them here, but either way, Johnny has fallen into a truly disturbed place.
The next day, however, he writes,
My memory's in flakes. Haven't slept. Nightmares fuse into waking minutes. I've lost sense of what's real and what's not. What I've made up. What has made me.
In November, Johnny visits Thumper one last time, meeting her outside the club where she works. She's single now and seems pretty interested in continuing to know Johnny, asking him to stay in touch, and even seems to give him some obvious signs that she wants to kiss him. Instead, Johnny hugs her very platonically, almost paternalistically, kisses her on the cheek, and says goodbye.
She told me to keep in touch, and I told her to take care, and then as I walked away, I waved, and with that, bid adieu to the happiest place on earth.
This reincorporation of the phrase, in context, seems to transform it. His love for her was a fairy tale, something he dreamed of, but he seems to believe he can't really have. And then, Johnny doesn't write another journal entry until almost a year later, August 28th, 1999.
He's train hopped his way to Flagstaff, Arizona, finding his way into a mostly empty bar with some surprisingly welcoming people. A band plays, he chats with the bartender, he's seemingly still sober, ordering a ginger ale for himself and buying around for the band with some of the last bits of money he has. And then he hears a lyric from the band which catches his attention.
I live at the end of a 5.5-minute hallway. Utterly surprised, Johnny asks the band about their lyrics, and they enlighten him on the inspiration for much of their writing, a little book they found on the internet called House of Leaves.
It turns out there's a whole underground fan base dedicated to the book. The earlier versions that were released as Johnny worked on it. The band's copy in particular is full of their own footnotes and writings in the margins. Everybody wonders what happened to that Johnny guy, where he disappeared to.
Johnny, amazed, decides it's best not to reveal his identity here. Instead, he wanders outside, finds an old ash tree, and falls asleep beneath it. He awakens to find a dog, a husky, sitting next to him. It follows him as he walks around, even lays in his lap as he writes this very journal entry.
I still feel a strange and oddly familiar sorrow. At least, though, it's getting milder. I can hear a train rattling off in the distance, but I don't need to leave yet. Not yet. There's time now. Plenty of time. And somehow, I know it's going to be okay. It's going to be alright. It's going to be alright.
And at least chronologically, that's the last time any of us will ever hear from Johnny Truant.
That isn't, oddly, the last journal entry House of Leaves includes, though. Instead, we pull back to October 31st, only a couple of days after his encounter with Kyrie and the Gdansk man. Johnny gathers the manuscript and leaves his hotel room through the window. He's been hit with a wave of clarity suddenly. He never killed the Gdansk man or Kyrie. In reality, after beating the Gdansk man, he got off him, said something about lewd. The Gdansk man apologizes, obviously badly beaten, and he and Kyrie just drove off. Thank God. Then Johnny wandered west into the desert, and this clarity he's been overcome with also brings him sharper memories of his childhood, and a revelation about his mother.
Her letter was hopelessly wrong, maybe an invention to make it easier for me to dismiss her. Her fingers never closed around my throat. They only tried to wipe the tears from my face. Of course, she was lost in a blur. My poor father taking her from me, forced to grab hold of her, especially when they got to the foyer and she started to scream, screaming for me, not wanting to go at all, but crying out my name. And there it was, the roar, the one I've been remembering. In the end, not a roar, but the saddest call of all, reaching for me. Her voice sounding as if it would shatter the world, fill it with thunder and darkness, which I guess it finally did. Then one day, I don't know when, I forgot the whole thing, like a bad dream. The details of those 5.5 minutes just went and left me to my future.
Out in that desert, as night falls, Johnny takes the manuscript, the pages that he and Zampanò have written, which he has been haunted, consumed by, and burns it, just as Lewd asked him to, just as Navidson did. And like Navidson, Johnny finds himself alone in darkness. I'm sorry, I have nothing left, he writes. Except for the final words the book leaves us with from Johnny. A story. The one Doc told me when I was up in Seattle, who you'll remember didn't exist. With the gravity this story has in Johnny's narrative, I won't try to summarize it for you. I'm going to read it as he wrote it, just slightly abridged. It begins with the birth of a baby, though not a healthy baby, born with holes in its brain and showing an absence of gray-white matter differentiation. So bad that when the child first emerges into the world, he's not even breathing. Kid cyanotic, Dr. Noel shouts, and everywhere heart rates leap. Now the baby goes on to the Ohio, a small 2x2 foot bed with a heater and examination lights mounted above. They rush him to the ICU where he's plugged into life support. Life seems it will continue, but it's not an easy march. The red and green lights follow the baby's every breath. Red numbers display the exact amount of pressure needed to fill his fragile lungs, while the EKG faithfully tracks every heartbeat. The mother, of course, sees none of this. She sees only her baby boy, barely breathing, his tiny fingers curled like seashells, still daring to clutch the world. Later, Dr. Noel and other experts will explain to her that her son has holes in his brain. He will not make it. He can only survive on machines. She will have to let him go. But the mother resists. She sits with him all day, and then she sits with him through the night. She never sleeps. The nurses hear her whispering to him. They hear her sing to him. A second day passes. A second night. Still she doesn't sleep. The charge nurse starts to believe they are witnessing a miracle. More and more people start drifting by the ICU. Is this remarkable mother still awake? Is she still talking to him? What is she singing? More than a handful of people openly suggest the baby will heal. Soon, even Dr. Noel finds himself caught up in this whispered hysteria. Finally, the morning of the 4th day, the mother rises and walks over to Dr. Noel. "I think it's time to unplug him," she says quietly. More than the normal number of doctors and nurses assemble around the boy, and though they are careful to guard their feelings, quite a few believe this child will live. Dr. Noel gently explains the procedure to the mother. First, he will disconnect all the non-essential IVs and the nasogastric tube. Then, even though her son's brain is badly damaged, he will administer a little medicine that will ensure there is no pain. Lastly, he and his team will cap the IV, turn off the monitors, the ventilator, and remove the endotracheal tube. And we'll leave the rest up to... Dr. Noel doesn't know how to finish the sentence, so he just says, "Well..." The mother nods and requests one more moment with her child. The staff takes a step back. The mother returns to her boy, gently drawing fingers over the top of his head. For a moment, everyone swears she has stopped breathing, her eyes no longer blinking, focusing deeply within him. Then she leans in and kisses him on the forehead. "You can go now," she says tenderly. And right before everyone's eyes, long before Dr. Noel or anyone else can turn a dial or touch a switch, the EKG flatlines. Asystole. The child is gone. The beginning of the end of the Navidson record picks up from Karen's perspective next. It turns out the tape she played was blank.
And turning around to see the house is transformed again, Karen, despite being intensely terrified, notices something within that darkness. She returns with a flashlight, disappears into the void, and then the wall reappears behind her. It seems that that blue speck, which appeared at the end of Navidson's tape, was Karen's flashlight, and by entering the house herself, Karen conquers the fear and trauma she has been carrying since they moved in, since long before that. As Zampanò writes,
"There is little doubt her love for Navidson is the primary catalyst. I believe Karen could never have crossed that line had she not first made those two remarkable cinematic moments, What Some Have Thought and A Brief History of Who I Love. By relearning to see Navidson, she saw what he wasn't, and consequently began to see herself much more clearly. The most important light carried into that place was the memory of Navidson, and Navidson is no different. Though it's commonly assumed his last word was care, I believe this utterance is really just the first syllable of the very name on which his mind and heart had finally come to rest. His only hope, his only meaning, Karen."
This moment of clarity for Karen also parallels Johnny's moments in the desert, his recollection of the accurate version of his mother's departure clarifying his past, his view of his mother, and consequently his own distorted self-image as a monster. According to a nearby neighbor and the accounts from Karen herself, Karen found that she suddenly appeared in the yard, cradling Navidson in her arms. From her point of view, when she entered that darkness, the fear she'd been overwhelmed with in the past didn't just go away, it was still with her. But somehow she found the strength to put one foot in front of the other and make it to the end of that hallway. And at the end, she found Navidson, and suddenly everything just dissolved. To quote one of her rare interviews,
"We were in pitch blackness, and then I saw... No, actually my eyes were closed. Then I opened my eyes, and I could see trees and grass." You're saying the house dissolved? How's that possible? It's still there, isn't it? Karen doesn't respond to this question.
By the time they made it to the hospital, Navidson was on the precipice of death, his survival unclear. Hypothermia, frostbite, injuries, and broken bones from his bicycle crash and overextension.
The story goes that Karen spent days in the hospital room with him, talking and singing to him as he survived on life support for days. In the end, Navidson survived, but not without cost, losing an eye, hand, and ear to frostbite, getting a hip replacement, and needing crutches for the rest of his life.
The final moments of the Navidson record are uncharacteristically hopeful, sappy even, an epilogue of sorts. The family, finally married after all these years, have moved to Vermont. Karen's in the middle of recovering from treatment for breast cancer, but for now it seems to be working. Chad is a Lego aficionado hoping to be an architect. Daisy talks about the forests being filled with ghosts and fairies. It's not difficult to see the effects of their experience in the house has had on their current interests. The effects on everyone, really. It seems clear nobody ever fully recovers from their house, but for the time being, it's going to be all right. We see the family, in spite of their difficulties, or perhaps in the end because of their ability to overcome them on the other side, in a peaceful, serene place. But Navidson is not content to end the film on something so purely saccharine.
The film ends on a Halloween night in their new neighborhood. The camera panning past all the trick-or-treaters, costumes, and decorated suburbs to an empty forest road. A single street lamp flickering out, and darkness sweeps like a hand.
Little solace comes to those who grieve when thoughts keep drifting as walls keep shifting, and this great blue world of ours seems a house of leaves, moments before the wind.
That was obviously a lot. There's a lot of pins we left in the board to come back to, a story that is just as twisted and opaque as the hallways of the house, so many questions left unanswered, mysteries left unsolved. Now, if I'm being honest with you, there is no way I'll be able to cover every question and connection and put them all to bed, mostly because I haven't covered everything. There are so many more details and specifics and minutiae that I had to balance and leave out for brevity's sake, if you can call any of this brief. Either way, even after all of this, I still recommend you read through House of Leaves for yourself, as new things occur to me upon every reread, and there's a lot to uncover for yourself. In any case, I do think we have covered enough ground to begin untangling this knot of roots and to try and understand this situation a little better. So first, let's take a bit of a 485-foot view of everything, cover the very basics, and then we'll need to answer two very core questions.
The Navidson Record, at its most basic, is about a family who move into a new home, hoping to reconnect and overcome some of their interpersonal difficulties. The house, it turns out, is haunted in a way, not by some restless bygone soul. No, it's closer to the haunting of Hill House. The architecture itself is just wrong. It's something far older, more cosmic. The house opens into a winding maze of darkness that both endangers the family physically, but also opens up deeper conflicts within them. After the death and destruction and separation caused by the house, the family overcomes it, and in doing so, overcomes their interpersonal difficulties and personal traumas as well, allowing them to grow and change.
Really, it's a pretty classic gothic horror tale, but of course, the full picture isn't so simple. In parallel, we have Zampanò's writings and Johnny Truant's footnotes, which tell an interconnected but still independent story of their own. It starts with an old man writing a massive manuscript about a film, the Navidson Record, that if we were to take at face value, he created out of whole cloth. For what reason, we are unsure, perhaps to explore his own past, which we only have a fleeting glimpse of, a blind man dissecting the darkness in which he lives and the past which he lived through. This manuscript falls into the hands of Johnny Truant, a young man with a past we know a lot more about, a harrowing upbringing, a tragic separation from his parents, one trauma after another, until he finds this book, which seems to send him spiraling, both into the manuscript itself, trying to understand it, to piece together what the old man wrote and why, but also into himself, recalling his past, relating it to what Zampanò has written, and falling further out of reality into the dark hallways of the book until, at his lowest moment, he finds a clarity in his memories and can accept and overcome the traumatic childhood that has been haunting him all his life. Just as the family in the Navidson Record, Johnny is able to grow and change in the end. Now, that's a surface level, basic look, But the Navidson Record and House of Leaves are anything but surface level. The real work lies in the details, in the questions of reality, cosmology, mythology, and psychology. You know, the ologies. We have been shown over and over again that we cannot blindly trust what we see, what we read, that we have to question all the information that's been given to us. To truly make sense of it all, we need to ask ourselves two very important questions. What exactly is the house? And who is truly behind the writing of House of Leaves? What set of eyes are we really seeing this story from? Let's start by taking a look at the house. And what better place to begin than a brief glance at its history? We don't learn about it in too much detail, and much of what we do learn seems rather unassuming, but there are clues here and there that suggest a lot about the nature of the house.
The house was built in Virginia in 1720 and has had its fair share of other owners, but most don't stay for long and leave feeling in some way unsettled. So though the events experienced by Navidson and Karen and the rest are clearly extraordinary, there's clearly something unusual that's been inherent to this house since its inception, and there's a great deal to imply that its origin doesn't just begin with some 18th century construction. The Jamestown Journal entries seem to suggest that something strange, something even architectural, existed on that land well before the house was ever built, something that found people in their darkest moments and led them into the very same depths we see in the Navidson Record.
Perhaps this ancient thing we've been calling the house just attached itself to that particular home when it was built in the area. It found a host, and it truly does seem ancient. The sample analysis done by Navidson and Reston doesn't reveal a lot, except that the ashen material it's made from is something interstellar, something older than our planet, maybe even as old as the universe itself. All of this, combined with what we know about its supernaturality, seem to suggest it's something more than just old. It is something cosmic, maybe even mythological. There are more than a few allusions to the idea that this house is something more eldritch, more than just its ancient history, something more of myth, of ancient cosmology and metaphysics, that it is in fact the world tree of Norse myth. Let me explain. The house is located on Ash Tree Lane, and throughout the Navidson Record and the book, we see the house represented by or in connection with trees, specifically ash trees. Of course, there's the book's title, House of Leaves, but also remember that, for instance, Johnny falls asleep beneath an ash tree in Flagstaff near the end.
Well, one of the oldest ash trees of mythology is the Norse Yggdrasil, the world tree where all realms exist, stretching throughout its roots to its branches, basically containing the universe. It is cosmically ancient, like the house. One might even interpret the house to be made from the wood of Yggdrasil, those cosmological primordial materials. But more than just a passing connection to a cosmically ancient ash tree, there are a lot of other connections that we can make directly to Norse mythology in both the film and the book. An obvious one would be Pelafina's letters' references to Vikings, for instance. Within the roots of Yggdrasil lies a massive dragon-like monster known as Nidhogg, which one could connect to the monster many believe inhabit the house. And more than that, this idea of the house being Yggdrasil is reinforced by the stories of the people inside it. Tales of Odin often focus on the different ways he sacrifices himself to attain wisdom. For instance, hanging himself from the branches of Yggdrasil, or sacrificing his eye to the Well of Mimir, which is located in the roots of that cosmic ash tree. Navidson nearly dies when descending into the house on Ash Tree Lane, in pursuit of clarity and knowledge, at the cost, in the end, of his eye, just like Odin. And though the imagery of hanging from the tree is perhaps more striking, Mimir's well offers a much stronger link, as wells appear in Karen's childhood, in Navidson's dreams, and Zampano's comparison of the stairway to an endless well.
In case that didn't convince you, I might also note Zampano makes several direct references to Yggdrasil in his writings, including a page of ergodic typology, which spells it out quite directly. With this idea of the house being analogous to the world tree, it seems to make sense that it has been around just as long as the universe has existed, a void around which all else in the universe exists.
Not to be so internet creepypasta brained, and this will be my one and only reference to this, so give me some credit, but it is almost similar to The Backrooms, or maybe a more British television interpretation, The Void from Doctor Who, in that it is a space between spaces, existing as an impossible, expansive darkness which you can enter but can't see from the outside. It is the space which contains space, between space.
That isn't where the mythological connections end, of course. There's obviously the matter of the Minotaur and the maze, any number of other mythological references made by Zampanò, as well as some connections to the story of Oedipus, but those are all a little different, which we'll get to later. Most importantly, a recontextualization of the house as not just a physical building, but something more intangible that is simply using it as a host, I think leads us much closer to a true understanding of it. Though this strange force does most explicitly use the house on Ash Tree Lane as a host, that is not the only form it takes, as we've touched on throughout our analysis. Johnny explores the house through the writings of Zampanò, which mirrors the construction of the house with its ergodic formatting, and which opens up those darkened hallways in his mind. And he's not the only one. One of Zampanò's readers had a similar reaction as well. Even now, we are exploring the house through this kind of reading, through this video. Karen explored the house by rewatching the tapes of it. Johnny's dreams of the atrocity sinking into the ocean is a manifestation, as are his memories of the hallway where he was separated from his mother, as is Navidson's dreams, as is Karen's well, as is the ash tree that Johnny falls asleep under, as is the darkness itself. The house is not physical. It is not literally any of these things. These are symbols which stand in for what the house is, and it all comes down to that subjectivity.
Zampanò writes that our perspective of a maze changes it. Those who explore the house on Ash Tree Lane find it reacts differently depending on their personality, temperament, reaction, expectations, and experiences. The house is not what comes for us, it is what comes from us. The Minotaur inside the maze is not some creature of the house, it's not something you'll find coming after you, because it is you. Because in the end, the house is the mind. It is the darkest pit within you, from which the layers of your psyche build and haunt, that you must explore, push through, and eventually deconstruct entirely. Burn it until you have nothing left but that darkness. And there, you can confront it. And if you're lucky enough to make it to the other side, find what matters most to you.
For Karen and Navidson, that was each other. For Johnny, it was a clearer view of himself and his mother, but we'll return to their personal journeys in a bit.
It's like therapy, basically. If you wanted to say it, smile.
All of that brings us to another anchoring question. When we look out over what we've read, what we've seen, something just doesn't add up. Why are there so many connections between Pelafina's letters and the main manuscript, supposedly written by Zampanò? Why are there so many connections between Johnny's life and the Navidson Record? Is Johnny correct that the Navidson Record was created by Zampanò, or is there something else at play? There's no easy answer to any of these questions, but many have come to the conclusion that the only real explanation is that one of these authors, either Zampanò, Pelafina, or Johnny, are the architects of it all, that they've made most, if not all of this completely up, that these aren't actually separate pieces with connections, but that there is one single unified author. Since the very beginning, we've known that we cannot trust all that we read or see, and nobody has been more upfront about this than Johnny Truant.
He explains from the very outset that he's going to change things. He's a mentally unwell man who seems to believe this old manuscript he's found seems to connect to his life very personally. So why not, say, add the checkmark his mother asked him to leave on his letter in the corner of a page? He changed water heater, why not just throw an homage to his mother's use of the word Pisces in there? Or the whole detail about Karen practicing her smile, the same way his mother wrote that she did. Or change the name of the book Navidson has at the end to the title of his book. He had the final say on everything we see, only sending pieces to the editors when he finished reviewing them. Who knows how much of anything is left of the original?
Who knows if he didn't just completely invent Zampanò? Even the name Johnny Truant is clearly a pen name he's using. We have no idea who he actually is. He could be some guy named fucking Mark or something, I don't know. Even assuming much of what he tells us is true, there's no reason to believe there's any real supernatural or special quality to the manuscript he found, like he tries to convince us in his foreword.
He tells us that reading this may cause us to fall into a spiral of fear and darkness, just as he did, but this idea that an old manuscript he's found is hiding some deeper secret for him, that it's secretly about him, is totally in line with the kind of paranoia one would expect for a man with the kind of condition he may have. The book itself even opens with a line that seems to entirely contradict his entire foreword about how the reader may find themselves in the same pit as him.
This is not for you.
This manuscript, at the very least heavily edited by Johnny Truant, has always been for him. It's his house, his journey.
This way of looking at things does seem to wrap everything up in a nice little bow, I'll give it that. It makes everything neat and understandable, but it feels a little bit like a dream theory, doesn't it? Any loose ends or connections can be left easily at the floor of, well, maybe it's just this mentally unwell guy adding it just because. It doesn't really compel one to look much deeper. Luckily for us, there are a few other unified author theories which do ask us to dig a little deeper, though they all eventually fall back into this idea that much of this, including entire people, were fabricated entirely by one author. The most popular of these theories is probably the idea that the entire book is written by Pelafina, Johnny's mother. Many of the references and quirks of writing that appear to connect Zampanò and Johnny and the Navidson Record together eventually come back to Pelafina and the Whalestoe Letters. Her use of the Pieces Pisces switch, the checkmark, and Karen's smile. Pelafina's signature writing style seen in those letters match with every layer of the story, from Zampano's pseudo-intellectual digressions, references to mythology, use of many different languages and writing that move about the page, or Johnny's long-winded, often difficult to parse monologues, even just the vocabulary everyone writes with. And there are further secrets hidden within the Whalestoe Letters that point to this too.
Using the same technique Pelafina encoded her other messages in, you can find little sentences throughout her other letters, such as,
"My dear Zampanò, who did you lose?"
Did Pelafina know Zampanò? If so, what was their relationship? Is it no accident Johnny found his manuscript then? One way to interpret all of these connections is that most of what we read is not true at all. Pelafina wrote the whole thing, entirely making up the characters of Zampanò and Johnny, or at least what they supposedly do in the book. And this all comes down to the hospital story.
The final story Johnny tells about a mother and her newborn in the hospital has been quite a tricky topic. How it fits into everything isn't immediately clear upon a first read, and for many, it comes down to this. Ironically, the story that it seems Johnny just made up at the end there is the only true story in the entire book. It's the story of Pelafina and her son, Johnny, a son who she never got to see grow up. And so, Pelafina writes House of Leaves, imagines the life he would have lived in order to, in some way, process it.
Sure, it's a bit convoluted, a lot of layers to it, and his life isn't particularly happy for the most part, but Pelafina is nothing if not a bit eccentric. That final story from Johnny is, in truth, Pelafina showing her hand a bit. To be fully transparent, this is not the only way to interpret a Pelafina as author theory. There are probably dozens, and there are more secrets to be found within the Whalestoe Letters than I've mentioned here. In all honesty, the Whalestoe Letters alone could make an entire video. Still, I think this gives a decent gist as to why some believe Pelafina is behind all this. Though it's certainly compelling, it doesn't avoid the issue of the previous theory either. It collapses the story down, it simplifies the connections between all these individual pieces into a neat explanation. Someone, to some extent, just made it all up. It definitely makes one look at things in the book from a different perspective. It gives depth to Pelafina in a way other viewpoints might not, but it is by no means the only way to look at this. The last of these unified author theories I'd like to talk about is this idea that Zampanò is, in the end, the architect of all of this, including Johnny Truant. And I'd like to start with this quote from Zampanò.
"Why did God create a dual universe? So he might say, 'Be not like me. Me, I am alone.' And it might be heard,
This seems to be a reflection on himself as much as anything. The lonely man with seemingly no living family or friends, the creator of this manuscript. Additionally, there are many times where Zampanò almost seems to slip up and reveal that all of this is coming from him. For instance, at one point, when talking about Tom drinking, Zampanò writes,
Tom fails to stop at a sip. He might have spent all night drinking had exhaustion not caught up with me.
An odd little slip up. But more than this, Zampanò is, perhaps, the creator of much more.
See, there's this whole appendix of extra writings that is attached to the end of House of Leaves. Poetry, journal entries, found among his pages of writing. One such journal entry from September 21st, 1970 reads,
Perhaps in the margins of darkness, I could create a son who is not missing, who lives beyond even my own imagination and invention, whose lusts, stupidities, and strengths carry him farther than even he or I can anticipate, who sees the world for what it is, and consequently bears the burden of everyone's tomorrow with unprecedented wisdom and honor, because he is one of the very few who has successfully interrogated his own nature. His shields are instantly available, though seldom used, and those who value him shall prosper, while those who would destroy him shall perish. He will fulfill a promise I made years ago, but failed to keep.
Almost sounds like Johnny, doesn't it? A man who we only hear from in the margins of Zampanò's work, a man, according to Pelafina's letters, whose birthday is exactly 9 months after the date of this journal entry. There are many ways to take this. Maybe Johnny's journal entries were written by Zampanò from the start. Maybe Zampanò somehow supernaturally willed Johnny into existence for him to discover his manuscript. Again, this is not an end-all be-all explanation of this perspective. There are many more Pisces and theories you can dig into, but I think this gives us a decent enough idea concerning the whole concept of a unified author. The issue with all of these, in my opinion, is twofold. Firstly, they're really unfalsifiable. Any of these people could be behind it all, or someone else entirely. When you're dealing with an unreliable narrator, there's kind of a way to explain anything away. Nothing or anything could be real in some sense, and there's no way to parse out which is which. It's not to say taking these perspectives into account isn't worthwhile. It absolutely can be. But we can't just stop there, thinking we've revealed everything. And that's where issue number 2 is. I don't think coming up with some real truth behind everything is what's most valuable about the Navidson Record or House of Leaves, because we'll never really know for certain. Instead, it's about pulling out the meaning that lies between all these connecting layers. Like the house itself, it's not about trying to scientifically, factually understand it, prove something about it, but to find what it means to the people inside and what it means to us. Except that there is no truth, quite the opposite, that our only hope is to deconstruct it. As I've said over and over, from the very outset, we are told not to trust all that we see, to question everything presented to us as truth. And as much as the people within these stories deconstruct their internal lives, the very formatting of these mediums deconstruct themselves. In a letter Zampanò leaves to whoever discovers his manuscript, which ends up being Johnny, he writes,
They say truth stands the test of time. I can think of no greater comfort than knowing this document has failed such a test.
His writing often reads as parody of academia, falling apart into twisting paragraphs and empty pages, a deconstructed novel in itself. He goes on tangents about the waning authenticity of the visual medium. Karen and Navidson and Johnny deal with false memories and distorted images of themselves and the people in their lives. The imagery of the house in all its forms ends up being darkness, a symbol of pure absence. Tom casts shadow puppets in his tent, his very own Plato's cave, but these are mere impressions, and when the light is taken away, we are left with nothingness. With a wider lens, this is the epitome of postmodernism. Every step asks us to deconstruct our cultural and instinctual preconceived notions to discover there is no universal truth to be found. Johnny tells us right from the beginning.
You'll watch yourself dismantle every assurance you ever lived by. You'll stand aside as a great complexity intrudes, tearing apart piece by piece all of your carefully conceived denials. Then you'll turn to face the thing you most dread, what is now, what will be, what has always come before, the creature you truly are, the creature we all are, buried in the nameless black of name.
In some sense, this seems quite obvious. When every piece of information is unreliable, there's no real trusted truth to be found inside. But in some sense, I think it would also be a simplification of the heart at the core of Johnny and the Navidson Record stories. These people walked into that darkness, they deconstructed everything, burned the very book we've been reading, House of Leaves, but in that darkness they found a light. They took apart all the little pieces of themselves and found something at the core that mattered to them, something subjective and personal that they couldn't throw away, something that brought them out to the other side. As sentimental as it may be, they found that it wasn't some scientific discovery or finishing some big project that was keeping them going. It wasn't an objective answer to their problems. It was the people that they loved. At the heart of this story, the core that we find isn't about what's real or not, what's true. It's just about people finding not some larger cosmic meaning, but what is meaningful to them. Two sets of people, two stories running in parallel, two timelines running at the same time. The story of the Navidson Record and the story of Johnny Truant, and how, despite their differences, they are telling the same story. Throughout this journey, we've noted interesting parallels between Johnny's life and the lives of those in the Navidson Record, but haven't dwelled too long on them. But I think these two stories, explicitly Navidson and Karen's journey with their house and Johnny's with the manuscript, are actually the key to this entire tangled story. That the main through line in this mess is these two journeys and how they connect, and in following them, the themes and meaning within both are revealed. There are plenty of superficial connections and parallels we can point to.
The guns Johnny buys are the same as Holloway and Reston's weapons. Chad ends up getting into lots of schoolyard fights, just as Johnny did in his childhood.
There are some more significant connections in how their respective houses and traumas manifest too.
The hallway where Johnny is separated from his mother, a 5.5-minute memory mirroring the 5.5-minute hallway of the Navidson Record. Even more so, the hallway eventually reverts to nothing more than a shallow closet, which feels like a reflection of the closet where Pelafina ultimately took her own life. Interestingly enough, by hanging. Odin, who often mirrors Navidson, being highly associated with gallows and hanging, in part due to his own hanging from the world tree Yggdrasil, or the growl of the house manifesting for Johnny in the screams of his mother as she is taken away.
These pieces of their individual journeys connect to each other, both on a literal but also thematic level. And this is only the beginning. There are larger recurring themes in each of their stories which they share as well. One of the biggest ties between these two stories is that both Johnny Truant and Will Navidson are Oedipus. I know that sounds odd, but let me explain. First, we have to look at Johnny and Navidson's relationships with the women in their lives. For Navidson, the central female figure in his life is Karen, his long-term partner and eventual wife. For Johnny, it's his mother. While Johnny and Navidson often mirror each other, so do Pelafina and Karen.
Both practice their smiles in front of mirrors, for instance.
If we're to look at the Johnny Truant and Navidson Green stories as paralleled, you can already see a slightly Freudian theme here. If they're two sides of the same coin, the female relationship being both mother and romantic partner is definitely a noteworthy change, an interesting element. But it gets a lot more explicit than that when you look at their individual intricacies.
For Navidson, it's actually pretty simple and straightforward. Oedipus's name literally means swollen feet, in reference to the character having scarred and swollen feet. Navidson, as briefly mentioned, also deals with swollen and injured feet from his chronic fungal infection. So he physically mirrors Oedipus in that way.
For Johnny, it's a little more psychological, more to do with an Oedipus complex. Throughout his story, Johnny seems to look for the female love and connection he lost with his mother in his romantic and sexual partners, Ashley being especially of note, who is notably blonde just like Karen is. But most damning is the connection between Thumper and his mother.
Johnny's nickname for this woman, whose real name we never even learn, is based on a rabbit, Thumper, from her rabbit tattoo. Johnny's mother's name is Pelafina Lièvre, Lièvre meaning hare in French, as in like the animal hare, like a rabbit.
There's that connection, romantic relationship mirroring the maternal one. And as long as we're talking about the significance of tattoos here, one can't forget the whole happiest place on earth comment Thumper makes, and Johnny's longing for some warm, happy place covered in sunlight. It all feels a little, bear with me here, like he's searching for the earliest maternal comfort he lost by returning to whence he came. I know it's weird, maybe some of this sounds like a bit of a stretch, but this whole Oedipus complex shows up in so many little ways. The book is all very Freudian, but those themes to me are most important because they allow us to connect Navidson to Johnny and Karen to Pelafina, and how their relationships will mirror each other despite being of two different natures, maternal and romantic. Understanding them this way can help us answer some of the biggest question marks we have left, like the meaning of Johnny's hospital story. So, understanding these characters are direct mirrors of each other, we can look at their journeys with a more informed context. But I should say from the outset, these connections aren't always exactly one-to-one. There are differences where a lot of the nuance lies, and sometimes the parallels come up in ways you might not expect between people you might not initially associate. For one, I think that Karen and Johnny have a lot of specific mirroring as well. But anyway, the thesis of my claim here remains that Johnny Truant's story within the footnotes and the events of the Navidson Record are indeed stories which follow the same arc with the same events and very similar outcomes, and shared themes, the themes that define the house, the film, the book, the whole tangled mess. And it all begins in their childhoods.
Johnny Truant and Navidson both dealt with early loss and trauma in childhood. Navidson with a violently drunk father and an absent mother who left the family early on, and Johnny with, well, after his father died, a violently abusive stepfather, and his mother was involuntarily taken away in his childhood as well. As for Karen, we don't know much, except that she also allegedly lived with an abusive stepfather. And it is definitely worth noting that Johnny describes the place he was taken by Raymond the same way he describes the place he takes Kyrie during his break with reality. It's not concrete, but it's possible that this points to Johnny and Karen experiencing that same type of abuse too, to some extent. And as a result of these experiences, these people had pretty fundamental personality changes. First, Johnny turned to violence, then simply to running, physically from place to place, but also internally, burying his memories with casual partying, substances, and hookups. Karen turned inward, quiet, building barriers to protect herself, while Navidson turned to obsessive ambition. All of these experiences left a darkness within their minds which would grow, build into their very own houses they will eventually be forced to explore. Next, they come upon external manifestations of the house. For Navidson and Green, it is the literal house. For Johnny, it is Zampano's manuscript about the house. Though their interactions with it at first seem innocuous, the family beginning to settle down well, Johnny only casually reading the manuscript, things slowly begin to ramp up. A closet appears while they're gone. Johnny begins realizing he's losing time while reading. These smaller oddities soon fall into obsession. Navidson can't get over that 1/4 inch. Johnny starts prioritizing his work on the book over other things in his life, and that continues to spiral until we are full tilt into the horrors of the house. Johnny feels monsters behind him as Navidson almost gets stuck in the dark hallways. Johnny is filled with nightmares and memories of his past, maybe his mother. Navidson dreams of the guilt of Delisle. This darkness begins completely overcoming them, fracturing their relationships. Navidson and Karen now precariously at odds, Johnny becoming further shut in until they dive in completely. Navidson is sent on his rescue mission. Johnny loses his job and exists mostly within his apartment, tape measures nailed to the floors to be assured his room isn't shifting as Navidson's can, and inevitably does. They reach what they believe may be their darkest moment, their full consumption by the house. Navidson is trapped at the bottom of the growing staircase, making his way up with no real way of knowing if he'll ever reach the top, while Johnny drops everything and drives around Virginia, then to his hometown. Both Navidson and Johnny end up in a sort of daze. Johnny forgets most of his journey while he's there, relives his childhood memories and traumas therein, revisits the sites of them. He's even described as being completely out of it. Navidson also goes into a sort of dissociated daze as he trudges up one stair at a time, his mind wandering to his own past and loved ones, from Delisle to his family to Karen, and both find themselves suddenly returned right back where they started. Johnny back in LA, Navidson back in his living room. And this is where we get a beacon of false resolution. Seemingly, they reached their lowest point and made it back alive, having overcome in some way what was troubling them.
Karen's acceptance of Navidson's death seems to heal some part of her. Navidson got the experience of being able to conquer an expedition into the house, perhaps quenching some thirst for adventure, coming out the other end realizing that what he really cares about is his family. Johnny finds that all these ghosts and memories that used to be there are gone now, and he can look forward. Navidson and Karen get to escape this place and go back to New York. Johnny gets a helping hand from the woman he's been infatuated with. It seems they've finally overcome. But the house has other plans.
Violence strikes. The house on Ash Tree Lane springs to life and attacks, not so eager to let them leave, and though Navidson and Karen escape alive, Tom is not so lucky. For Johnny, the Gdansk man is that violence, and it ends with the closest male friend Johnny seems to have dying.
Where Johnny was dour and motivated to find something more, looking for love and meaning, Lude was the type to enjoy casual flings and find the next biggest party. In that way, their dynamic also is similar to Navidson and Tom. Navidson being the ambitious career man with the family, Tom being the more chilled out bachelor type. In fact, their deaths seem to mirror each other as well, just kind of inverted. Tom's assumption of Navidson's death pulls him back to his vice of alcohol, and soon after he is violently killed by the house. For Lude, the violence he was subject to led him into harder drugs, which ultimately killed him. For both, the substance use is brought on in some way by something that happened to their friend. Navidson's disappearance down the stairs and Johnny's rivalry with the Gdansk man. It's here, with the violent loss of a close male companion, that we find Navidson and Johnny fall even further than before. They're not over their obsessions at all. Navidson stays for months, cutting contact with Karen as he tries to find some answer in the science, and ultimately decides the only thing he can do is return to the house. Johnny similarly cuts himself off from Thumper, falling into internal darkness, a complete break with reality. Both are haunted with dreams that represent their specific struggles with their specific houses, what they expect to find inside, and what that journey means to them. And let's not forget, Karen hasn't truly conquered her issues yet either, and her exploration of the house and Navidson through the footage of the Navidson Record is a similar event for her too.
Johnny and Navidson both fall into darkness, further and further until they cross a threshold, a place at the end of the house, the deepest, darkest part, where they'll find their clarity. That threshold is a window. Johnny jumps out the window of his hotel room. Navidson clambers through a window into that pure void, and they strip every single piece of themselves away, and in the final moment of purifying fire, light their respective copies of House of Leaves aflame, and have nothing left. But in that abyss, having torn everything else away, there's a light. For Navidson, of course, that's Karen's physical light. But one has to imagine he has some sort of mental clarity here too, just as Johnny does. Johnny's memories snap into clear view. The truth of the trauma he experienced is revealed to him. He is no longer beholden to the false ghost that told him he was the monster whose mother tried to kill him. Navidson too, struggling with the guilt of his apathy to the violence he witnessed with Delisle, believing himself to be a vulture, a monster in some ways. And of course, Karen has a moment similar to Johnny as well. Her exploration of Navidson through her vignettes, allowing her to see Navidson more clearly in honesty, just as Johnny's clear picture of his mother seems to heal him. I want to take a brief aside here to explicitly discuss some of these connections between Karen and Johnny. Though the links between the Navidson and Johnny arcs are pretty narratively clear in how they relate to their relationships with Karen and Pelafina, I think there's something to be said about how these relationships are also inverted at times. And I think it's really necessary to investigate this if we're to give Karen the depth she deserves. This is especially important because, though much of the explicit misogyny in House of Leaves from the characters themselves, especially as it relates to the way men interact with Karen, is pretty clearly, at the very least, satire of that sexism, I think there's a subtler way the narrative can sideline Karen, and I think it leads to a certain danger of her becoming sort of a Skylar White figure, though this work predates that character. A flawed person who is ultimately the more reasonable one in her worry about the danger her significant other is subjecting them to, but because the audience want to see the exciting, dangerous stuff, and because she has a history of infidelity which is seen as a betrayal of her partner, despite the many betrayals committed by her partner, these factors all contribute to a sexist reading of her character as ultimately a nag, or someone who just gets in the way. Additionally, I think there are some issues on behalf of the narrative in some framings of Karen's struggles as directly related to Navidson, and her overcoming of them focused entirely on Navidson, while Navidson's journey is a bit more independent, even though they both end up in the same place, needing each other. So there is kind of a danger of reading Karen too shallowly here, and I believe much of Karen's depth can come with understanding Karen's mirror to Johnny and how Navidson can mirror Pelafina. For one, there's some similarities I've already mentioned between the two. Johnny and Karen both exploring the house through external documentation of it instead of actually wandering the halls inside, aside from Karen doing this at the very end, and both coming to clarifying moments about themselves through a clearer view of another person. And therein lies, I think, the most telling parallel between the two. Karen is not the only one whose journey with the house is inherently dependent on the other person in her particular duo. Johnny's trauma also manifests itself in his attachments to his romantic relationships, and in the end, his overcoming is entirely reliant on clarifying his relationship with his mother, one where he felt intense closeness but also a degree of separation based on the false story about the day she left for the Whalestoe. And for Navidson's part, his trauma centers largely around a child he was unable to save, a reflection of a paternal failure to protect that one can imagine Pelafina felt as she was separated from Johnny, whose childhood proceeded to turn to violence and struggle. It was really neither of their faults, but one can imagine it's hard for a parent to feel that way. And in Navidson's career ambitions leading him to long and dangerous times away from Karen, we can see this as a continuation of the shared issue of separation, of not being there for someone. And Navidson's final epiphany may have been that by pursuing these endeavors at the cost of his family, he is continuing to not be there for Karen. And so he falls on the realization that the resolution to this issue must be to reunite with Karen and be there for his family, unlike his mother and father were for him. In this view, we can see that as much as Navidson and Johnny and Karen and Pelafina mirror each other, so too is the inverse true. And I think it's necessary to understand that to get a full picture of what's going on with all of their individual stories.
In the end, this moment of clarity leads them to an ending of sorts, a final moment of reconciliation, of literal healing, in a hospital.
For Navidson, his time in the hospital with Karen is obviously a literal physical healing, but it's also representative of their relationship healing, them coming together after their shared and individual traumas and reconciling. Karen sings and speaks to Navidson the entire time he's unconscious for days, just as the mother to the son in Johnny's story.
So it's pretty clear these are mirrored moments, but what does it mean that Navidson survives, and in Johnny's story, presumably a self-reflection on him and his mother to some degree, the child dies? Many have pondered that this is really a sign as to Johnny's ultimate fate, that he dies under that ash tree in Flagstaff. But I disagree. I have another reason I'll get to, but the first is just because I think the answer is more thematic and less literal. For Navidson, he has a chance to actually be with Karen after he's healed. But for Johnny, his mother died a long time ago. His moment of healing, this reconciliation, could never end with Pelafina and him actually being reunited. But Johnny has a part of him, this scared, traumatized child inside whose mother was ripped away from him before either could possibly have been ready. I think this story is Pelafina having the time to really say goodbye, the time they never really got, Johnny's newfound clarity allowing him to reconcile with his mother's memory. But eventually, she has to let him go. And he has to let her go, has to let that traumatized child go. It's tragic. There was never an ending like Navidson's available to Johnny, and that suffering won't ever fully leave him. But now it's something he can at least live with. That child inside him no longer needs to be kept alive artificially to haunt him. He's able to say goodbye to his mother properly, and just as Navidson and Karen did, he heals. And the final piece of their stories is kind of epilogue. The Navidson Green family are still obviously haunted by what they experienced, forever changed, but their lives are happier, their connections more authentic, and for now, it's going to be all right. The same goes for Johnny too. He burned the house, he reconciled with the memory of his mother. His life isn't perfect, he's homeless and broke when we find him. There's no happily ever after with Thumper, but for now, it's going to be all right. I mean, sure, he might have died soon after, but he just as well might have gone on living, like Pelafina asked him to. Who knows? He was always clearly using a pen name, and now that he's recovered from his house, he's overcome it. What other reason does he have to return to it, to reveal himself to us readers? He burned his copy. He's done with it. Like Reston said before him, once you've moved past that, you have no desire to court death. Why look back in that way? Will Navidson and Karen Green didn't. They all but disappeared from public life too, hardly ever discussing the film after its release. But just as Navidson was not content to leave his film on something so sappy and lighthearted, Johnny too leaves his story on a darker note. He tells us it's gonna be alright, before turning back at the last moment to recall the darkness, the tragedy and trauma which still hovers over all of this. And darkness sweeps like a hand. So, that's all I have to say, I guess. There's plenty more there, believe me, but I think I've done a decent job at scratching the surface, at least. Thank you all for watching, especially if you've made it this far into this thing. Thank you to the patrons for supporting the channel. Check out my Letterboxd, by the way, I'm fairly new there. Soundtrack for this video should be out on streaming services. The song used in the title sequence is Some Annihilation by Michael Hawks. Go stream that as well. I feel like I'm forgetting something. This does not feel right at all. I've just watched these people wander through the darkness and come out the other end, but I'm still here. I feel like the light is fading, but I don't know what is waiting for me in the darkness. I don't know what clarity or revelation I'm waiting for. I'm not sure of anything anymore. I'm not even sure this was a horror story, to be honest. Mark Z. Danielewski said himself, "I had one woman come up to me in a bookstore and say, you know, everyone told me it was a horror book, but when I finished it, I realized it was a love story." And she's absolutely right. Mark Z. Danielewski. Why do I know that name?